Teddy told me that in Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone.
And it's a great marketing stick to beat the consumer with. Just like Don Draper says right before launching into that presentation, nostalgia is delicate but potent. I Am Setsuna's nostalgia, our nostalgia, is the yearning for a golden age of RPGs, the era before Square Enix, Square and Enix. Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, CRT TVs, Famicoms, the release of the seminal second album from the Backstreet Boys, Backstreet Back.
Oh my God, we're back again.
The jeans were getting baggier and the tips were getting frosteder. And that is your nostalgia, right? I Am Setsuna, or Ikenie Toyuki no Setsuna, Setsuna of Sacrifice and Snow, was presented as a throwback to those aforementioned JRPGs, an homage to classics reinterpreted for not only a newer console generation, but potentially a new player base. In a world plagued by monsters and eternal snow, you play as Ende, a mercenary who becomes the guardian of the titular Setsuna as she embarks on a journey to sacrifice herself in an effort to placate the evil of the land. There's a lot to say about the characters, world, systems, and general development and reception of the game, so let's start by putting on our rose-tinted glasses. The golden age of JRPGs spanned from the 1990s to the mid-2000s. The era birthed some of the most beloved games and franchises of all time. Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Chrono Trigger, Star Ocean, Tales of, Trails, Breath of Fire. No one's arguing the quality during that time. But the simple reason was that the genre was both popular and profitable. Companies wanting their piece of the pie drove those great games to be created. Then over time, as console capabilities advanced, the dominance of the JRPG waned. By the time of the Xbox 360 and PS3, we were broadly on that FPS hype train. Western RPGs like Dragon Age and Mass Effect then rose to prominence, supplanting the JRPG with the WRPG, the Western RPG. Since then, JRPGs have, for the most part, been forced to adapt. Each franchise has handled it differently. Dragon Quest has firmly stuck to its guns, but had such a solid foundation it could afford to take that approach. On the other side of the coin, you've got Final Fantasy. After 12, the series has become an awkward teenager, unsure how to express itself as it enters adulthood. But for the record, I love the combat system of Final Fantasy Remake and Rebirth. Bandai Namco's Tales series has built on it action combat, reaching a peak with Tales of Arise. Neon Falcom's Trail series has continued to push turn-based combat. But none of these games are the blockbusters they once were, but there's still very much an audience, people who want the games of the 90s, who want to relive those memories. Inspired by Chrono Trigger was not only a phrase that was bandied about when marketing I Am Setsuna, but seems to crop up whenever there's a whiff of a game being a retro JRPG. I mean, I don't have nostalgia for Chrono Trigger, I have it for Final Fantasy VII. The first time I saw the game was when I visited a friend's house. I specifically remember two parts. One was his brother steering Cloud around Wall Market, and the second was him summoning Ramuh. But I actually didn't play Final Fantasy VII properly until years later when I bought Final Fantasy VII through 9. They were packed in those jewel cases that you had to handle like an archaeologist, gently opening each section so you didn't snap the hinge. I have nostalgia for playing Dragon Age, Tenchu, Metal Gear Solid. I don't have it for Chrono Trigger. It may be considered blasphemy, but I actually don't like Chrono Trigger that much. It just never gelled with me. Like the Beatles or the Backstreet Boys' third album, Millennium, I recognize its cultural influence and appreciate it, but that doesn't mean it's my jam. And while I'm digging this pit, I also really do not like Xenogears and Xenosaga. Sorry, Monolith, I just had to get that off my chest. But what are you yearning for exactly? If someone says inspired by Chrono Trigger, what does that mean? And it doesn't matter what the devs or the studio or the producer says, because it doesn't matter. It's nebulous. It's saying whatever makes you warm and fuzzy when thinking about X, associate it with Y. It's not like we've struck upon a revelation here, it's basic marketing. But if you ask me what was nostalgic about Final Fantasy VII, I can't simply point at one thing one mechanic, one measurable instance represented in ones and zeros. It's an amalgamation. Nothing will ever be that because it's a feeling. Outside of Am Setsuna's marketing, even some quick Googling with the set phrase inspired by Chrono Trigger will throw up indie games such as Sea of Stars, Alterium Shift, Cosmic Star Heroine, and Keylocker. For many, soliciting the spirit of a game like Chrono Trigger in your marketing is a way for you to both capture a potential audience and free association with a beloved IP. For Am Setsuna, Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy are inescapable giant shadows they stand before. Square Enix couldn't not mention them. You can't have a slogan like, let's take back our good old RPGs, which was used in their Japanese marketing, and not conjure up games from Square Enix's past. I'd also assume at the time of review, it was in their fact sheet and other supporting documentation. For those that might not be aware, if you're officially being given a game to review from a company, you'll often be provided supplemental information. This is generally about the game itself, such as its main features, general story, whatever marketing levers the publisher is pulling for hype. In the end, I think the heavy association with Chrono Trigger, which is mentioned in pretty much every review for the game, regardless of language, hindered more than it helped. But let's put all that negativity behind us for a moment and try to understand how a game like Am Setsuna even gets made in the first place. For those that grew up with Square and Enix during that golden age of RPGs, the company was one of, if not the biggest name in JRPGs. As that age came to a close in the mid-2000s, Squeenix was still pumping out Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games, whether they were multi-platform re-releases or new titles, but mixed in with that was a number of more diverse releases. Without delving too deep into Japan's attempts to capture a Western audience, which went beyond Square Enix, this period did see the company dabble outside of their core focus. This came in the form of studio acquisitions and publication deals. Tomb Raider, Hitman, Deus Ex Just Cause, clearly games and franchises meant to diversify the company's offerings beyond RPGs. That's not to say Squeenix wasn't delivering in the years after the Golden Age. Kingdom Hearts, the Bravely series, new Dragon Quest titles, Nier, Octopath Traveler, and more were being released. It's simply that in the modern gaming landscape, AAA RPGs did not have the chokehold on the industry that they did in their heyday, and were less of a surefire route to success and profitability. In fact, I think that bigger franchises that Squeenix took gave them a slightly unfair rep of losing their identity. Diversifying their portfolio seemed like the right play. It's often easier to just buy a studio and game franchise than it is to build your own presence in the West. But despite that, in 2013, Yoichi Wada resigned after the company posted a loss of 10 billion yen or 47 million pounds and whatever that is in freedom dollars. So in comes Yosuke Matsuda. Let's just focus on the decisions that led to Tokyo RPG Factory's creation rather than the guy's company-wide business strategy. In an interview with Rakuten InfoSeek News, which has since been taken down and can't be found in the Wayback Machine even, Matsuda said, "It is necessary for us to set up a system that allows us to meet the demands of our customers in a more timely manner. This is business speak for we need to make and release games on a shorter development cycle." You then combine this statement with what Matsuda said in a PlayStation blog entry on January 29, 2016. From a business standpoint, the demand for so-called JRPGs, even from overseas, is quite high. But with that in mind, it seems like there aren't many Japanese games in that style being released, so I thought we'd just have to make them ourselves. The translation is mine, so do with that what you will, but what I believe Matsuda is saying is that JRPGs are popular, and there does seem to be a market for them, but no one appears to be fulfilling that desire. Why is no company fulfilling that desire? Games are risky in general. Games from once super popular genres are even riskier. What we have with Tokyo RPG Factory is an amalgamation of a few business factors. We want games with a shorter dev cycle and therefore lower cost. We want to take a chance on a market that seems like there's a demand waiting to be filled. We want to get a bunch of people passionate about the golden age of RPGs together and see if we can reignite that spark. And of course, we want to make some sweet yen. To understand the steps before Tokyo RPG Factory came into being, we need to look at the interview on the PlayStation blog. Hosted by Satoshi Eguchi, chief editor of Dengeki Game Media, it included Yosuke Matsuda, president and CEO of Square Enix, Am Setsuna producer Kengo Uchibori, and the game director Atsushi Hashimoto. Prior to any official naming of the company, Matsuda and a number of devs got together to pitch ideas, small scale, indie budget, in the spirit of the Golden Age of RPGs, something with a real identity. With time, budget, and all the production style admin out of the way, a call was put out, asking if those both externally and internally wanted to be a part of the project. Obviously, we've got our director, Atsushi Hashimoto. Aside from working on Am Setsuna, Hashimoto was also the director of Final Fantasy Explorers, one of the planning staff on Nintendo and Project Sora's Kid Icarus Uprising, as well as the lead planner on the Nintendo DS remake of Saga 2. Kengo Uchibori, while fulfilling the role of producer on this project, worked as a planner on Kingdom Hearts 2, Fantasy Life, and Death by Cube and its sequel, Death by Snoo Snoo. Another notable addition to the team was Toy8, who has contributed to a ton of recognizable work across games, anime, and as an illustrator. From a pure character design perspective, they've worked on Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE, Ys, and Soul Cradle The World Eater. With those players and a bunch of others assembled, the newly dubbed Tokyo RPG Factory could get to work. In total, there were reportedly 10 in-house staff, supported by just a few dozen contractors. From the game's inception, Uchibori said that they wanted to create a game that would not fade from the public consciousness even after a decade. The sense of purpose translated into the game's title, Ikenie to Yuki no Setsuna, at least if you were in Japan. The idea of including sacrifice in the title was not only meant to catch the eye, but be a custom that was familiar to people worldwide. I do wonder if Tokyo RPG Factory fought to keep the name in some form of translation, but were ultimately dismissed. Setsuna of Snow and Sacrifice doesn't quite roll off the tongue, in English at least. Just Snow and Sacrifice? Some other name that would have both captured the theme and the character? It's a difficult one. Along with Sacrifice came Snow, to which Hashimoto said he'd like people to look back on Am Setsuna as the snowy RPG. There are a couple of things to unpack with Tokyo RPG Factory's use of snow and the seasons within their games. There's a word in Japanese, Setsugeka, snow, moon, and flowers. Its kanji consists of those three characters, Yuki, Tsuki, and Hana, and is what you describe as a metonym, which evokes beautiful scenery in nature. For an explanation of a metonym, we can turn to the Cambridge Dictionary, a word or expression that refers to something using the name of one of its qualities or features. For example, the high street is a metonym for the primary business street of towns or cities, with Setsugeka containing snow for winter, the moon for autumn, and flowers for spring. This thematically fit into the three games that Tokyo RPG Factory released, Am Setsuna, Lost Sphere, and Oninaki, respectively. In Japanese Culture and Communication, Critical Cultural Analysis by Ray T. Donahue, he offers his interpretation of Setsugeka. The Japanese love of nature, I believe, ought to be taken in a spiritual sense. This spirituality is based on honoring the natural course of events, the life cycle or cosmic unity. Inherent in the life cycle is process, a life force without which there could be no life cycle or cosmic unity. All things change and eventually merge with the surrounding environment. Thus, all things, including human beings themselves, are part of the same cosmic system. This underlying life force is celebrated by the motifs of snow, moon, and flowers. Sounds pretty life streamy, right? All things must return to Bugenhagen, sucking the ever-loving soul out of the planet and into his wizard sleeve. While we'll delve into the story later, Setsuna's sacrificial journey is portrayed as exactly that, the natural course of events, the penance that must be paid as part of the price of living in this monster-ridden world. In Haruo Shirane's 2012 book, Japan and the Culture of the Four Seasons, the author discusses the duality of snow's representation in Japanese culture. The winter depicted in classical Japanese literature is mild, with gently falling snow, which, as a harbinger of rich harvest, was regarded as auspicious. In the rest of Honshi, particularly on the Japanese seaside and in the northeast, snow was considered a serious hardship and a hazard. The severe snows of the area facing the Japan Sea, the so-called snow country, do not figure in classical literature and poetry. Am Setsuna serves as an expression of these dualities. The environment Setsuna and her guardians traverse are fraught with danger, treacherous mountain ranges, monster-filled passes, hazardous ruins, but the journey itself, much like the snowy season to some of Japan at the time, is an auspicious one. Finally, the idea of sadness also served as a thematic foundation. For Kengo, this was not just any old sadness, but Setsuna, the bittersweet melancholy, something that was uniquely Japanese. It would move beyond a word and into an emotion that would permeate through the team, transcending words into something that could only be felt and then experienced by the player. Transitioning from the thematic to the practical, Am Setsuna's character designs are one of its most striking facets. There's an echo of Yoshitaka Amano's work on the Final Fantasy series, maybe Kosuke Fujishima, but Toei 8's work is distinct in its own right. In a world where white overwhelms every facet, the characters act as colourful beacons against pallid backdrops. Obviously, technology and time has marched on, so it's much easier these days to represent more complex character designs within Am Setsuna's world. We're not in FF7 chibi territory, though we're not far off. I also appreciate how everyone's actually wrapped up for the frigid environment with their multiple layers and fur-lined jackets, but with the exception of Eterna, though that's actually kind of plot relevant. Am Setsuna's soundtrack is also one of its most notable elements. Composed solely on piano by Tomoki Miyoshi, it was then performed by Randy Kerber. Kerber has performed with the biggest names in the music industry: Michael Jackson, Rod Stewart, Sinatra, Donna Summer, so bringing him on board is a pretty big flex. With the team assembled, Tokyo RPG Factory would take roughly 2 years to develop the game, which can still be considered a relatively constrained dev cycle. Am Setsuna released on the PS4 and PC internationally on July 19, 2016. So how did it fare in the critical arena? Am Setsuna sits around the mid-70s on Metacritic, but kind of interestingly, while it occupies a 75 on OpenCritic, it has a 55% critic recommendation rate. A review score in the mid-70s is nothing to sniff at. In a less hyperbolic landscape, a 7 out of 10 is an experience that, in theory, is certainly worth your time. Simon Parkin over at Eurogamer said Am Setsuna was not just a loving tribute to the JRPGs of the 90s, Am Setsuna tells a memorable tale with a few bright design jewels of its own. In the review, Simon touches on what Tokyo RPG Factory was searching for in their game, the little moments. What's here, however, is enough. An enchanting story supported by simple, lost pleasures. It's the way in which your character leaves deep furrows as they run through the drift. It's the sound of rested snow thumping to the ground as you nudge past a tree. It's the old sea, watched from a cliff. Over at Game Informer, Joe Juba said, Am Setsuna's best gameplay and story beats are so rooted in its predecessors and often directly copied from them that it feels familiar and predictable. With a fine line dividing homage and imitation, Am Setsuna doesn't do enough to carve out its own identity. Pretty much any review you read on the game mentions Chrono Trigger, and the understanding that Tokyo RPG Factory was deliberately trying to evoke a sense of nostalgia associated with that game, while being unable to build on many elements outside of its narrative. I was interested in how Japanese outlets would react to a game like Am Setsuna. Honestly, given the fact that Dengeki was allowed to interview the devs and Square Enix's president, I was kind of ready to disregard that review. Famitsu too, to be honest. The Dengeki review is a puff piece at best. It's more of an overview of the game with not much criticism outside of being slightly confused with how the shop system works. They do call it a good old RPG, and say Square Enix's marketing line for the game was something akin to, "Let's take back our classic RPGs." An interesting element of reviews, regardless of language, is the wistful nature in which the reviewers recall their experience with classic JRPGs. It's easy to imagine reviews being typed through a pair of rose-tinted glasses, which is what I'm guessing Square Enix was counting on. If the team's mission was to evoke that nostalgia, they'd certainly achieve that. Am Setsuna is a game that trades heavily in nostalgia to its detriment. Tokyo RPG Factory gambled on the game's bittersweet, melancholic story centered around sacrifice and how nature warps its characters and world. It's a game about small, fragile moments, words exchanged with friends, a particularly striking view. It achieves those goals, but its story never quite manages to strike a lasting chord. Alongside this, its combat attempts to build on its predecessors, such as those oft-mentioned titles like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy. In reaching for the moon, the game finds itself tangled in a convoluted number of battle mechanics and systems that were overdeveloped for a relatively easy game. Its dungeons, enemies, bosses, and overworld are undercooked, forcing the game to lean too much on its narrative and battle system, which aren't quite strong enough to carry the rest of the game. In the end, Am Setsuna is a very earnest and heartfelt game that does manage to capture some of that old school nostalgia, but fails to innovate on it in a truly meaningful way. But as a 7 out of 10 game, it's well worth the time of any hardcore JRPG fan. I just don't think it's going to be the game to convert a non-believer. Am Setsuna puts great emphasis on its narrative, so I believe it's worth covering while discussing a number of the game's other elements along the way, so we can come to understand how many disparate parts converge. Our journey begins with our protagonist Ender trudging through the snow. He soon stops and draws his blade as a man appears from within the trees. Like Ender, he's a mercenary too, a member of a masked tribe of swords for hire. His name is Hapsper, and the two have been dispatched to rescue a girl lost in the forest. The mission, and by extension the location, is our training ground of sorts, where we're able to get to grips with Am Setsuna's combat. The inspiration from the likes of Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy should be pretty clear. An ATB, active time battle system, controls when both you and enemies are allowed to act. As in Chrono Trigger and, let's face it, a lot of modern RPGs, there's no fade to black or swirl. You transition straight into a combat encounter. At your disposal are various actions, though currently Ender's arsenal is pretty paltry. We can attack and use an item. Soon, just before the next encounter, Hapsper, the older mercenary, doles out a Spritnite stone. These essentially act like materia, equipable techniques that can work both offensively, defensively, and offer various kinds of support functions. Right now, Ender is only playing with Cyclone, which is similar to Chrono's Whirlwind attack. Further on, while we find the girl alive but a little worse for wear, out wanders a large bear-like monster. Time for the game's first boss fight. You're also introduced to momentum. Once your ATB is full, a secondary bar or orb begins to fill. When it's topped up, you'll bank a point of momentum charge for a maximum of 3 charges. If you hit the square button just after you've selected an action, you'll expend one of those charges, imbuing your action with additional effects. These can be anything from causing additional damage, proccing certain status abilities, and more. With the bear defeated and the girl safe, Hapsper plans to escort her back to her village. Just before he leaves, however, he asks Ender a pressing question. How long do you plan on staying in this line of work? Ender can answer with one of 2 options, and though this happens often in the game, they have no impact on anything whatsoever, so take that however you want. When Hapsper's departed, a mysterious man appears. He has a new mission for us. Off the coast of the mainland is a small isle, where a small village lies. In that village is a girl who will soon turn 18, and Ender is to kill her. We next see Ender aboard a ship bound for the village of Sacrifice to fulfill his contract. Once every 10 years, a sacrifice is chosen and must set out on a journey to the Last Lands. Now that time is upon the world again, but Ender is supposedly the instrument to cut that journey short. Why? Who knows? A mercenary is only paid to fulfill a contract. If you're familiar with games like Final Fantasy X and Tales of Symphonia, then the notion of a sacrificial journey a la Yuna and Colette will have sprung to mind. And if you've played those games, you'll have an inkling of where Am Setsuna's journey may take us. The ship pulls into Nive harbour, and from there, the village of Nive is only a short walk away. Traversal between destinations brings back the classic world map, an RPG staple that seemed to have died out by the 7th console generation. Thinking back to the PS3 and Xbox era, I can only really remember Tales of Vesperia featuring a traditional world map, and Lost Odyssey to a degree when you get the ship. I'm purposely not talking about mobile or handheld games or remakes or remasters though. By this generation, with the advancements in graphics and the actual design overhead it would have taken to create a separate instance of the game world, it just fell out of favour. World interconnectivity in JRPGs transitioned to either selecting destinations and travelling to them, or literally traversing the environment, or some combination of the two. In this sense, it became akin to an MMORPG, which I feel a lot of JRPGs turn to in order to design the various environments a player traversed between main hubs. Like most fanboys hopped up on nostalgia juice for that era, I'd still contend that an overworld does capture several things that a connected pathway does not. A sense of adventure, a sense of scale of the world and the characters placed in it. At the start of a game, you know little about the setting, the characters, how things are going to unfold, and then you look at a tiny sprite or model compared with the vast world beyond your starting village or wherever you've just come from, and you think, what's out there? Where is this adventure going to take me? That's not to say I don't appreciate how other games handle it. Tales of Arise and the Tales games in general had some beautiful environments, Trails of Cold Steel created a fantastic, if seriously convoluted world. Dragon Quest is great. An overworld in a game is an additive experience, not a subtractive one. That's a distinction we need to make. Having recently played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, spoilers, but when we actually were able to pilot the tiny Bronco in the waters and see the scaled down versions of the game's locales, I got a serious flood of nostalgia. Anyway, from Nive Harbor, Ender travels to the nearby Nive village. At the entrance, we're greeted by Raishin. From his welcoming tone, it seems like this village is a sanctuary compared with the dangers of the outside world. Like most of the villages in Am Setsuna, a few houses, their roofs laden with snow, dot the area with the odd chest or shiny thing to uncover. You can speak to the village folk, engage in a bit of good old house raiding for items, and get a hint about a girl who frequents a nearby monument. From the village chief, Ender can garner that Setsuna is one in a long line of sacrifices who have made the perilous journey from Nive. To them, while it's an occasion that solicits melancholy, it's also an auspicious event to be celebrated. The sacrifice is cleansing the world, after all. Our pursuit of Setsuna takes Ender into the Dazjaya woods, serving as a continuation of the game's onboarding. To go with the game's Arctic or winter theme, you'll meet a new walrus-like enemy which sports a fair bit more health than the penguin-like Pengies. Along with the evergreens hemming in our path, you may have also noticed the more vibrant golden-hued trees injecting colour into the environment. I think they're supposed to be a type of plum blossom that have adapted and are still able to bloom in the environment. Taking a look at one of the game's key pieces of artwork, the trees feature prominently. In a way, I believe they're supposed to reflect Setsuna herself, her red hair a stark contrast against the snowy environment. And speaking of the game's titular character, we are about to meet her. A little ways from the woods stands a lone monument on a rocky peninsula. Here, Setsuna prays to her mother. Ender approaches, draws his blade, but the girl speaks first. She reveals herself to be the sacrifice, and upon this monument is engraved the names of all those who have made the journey before her. While Setsuna doesn't beg for her life, she simply states that it is her destiny to die, whether by Ender's hand or at the climax of her journey. The player does have a choice of whether to swing Ender's blade or not. If you choose to attack, he hacks her head off, and that is the game done. Thanks for watching. But seriously, it's a dumb choice to give the player because it impacts nothing. Regardless of your foe's choice, Setsuna has backup in the form of Raishin, the guy we just met at Nive village, and a hooded girl. Both are more than happy to take on Ender and end up knocking him out. That's the game done. Thanks for watching. Ender awakes back at Nive village. Instead of outright killing him, he's been lugged through the forest and is now a prisoner. As he struggles to break free, the hooded girl from before enters. Turns out she's a relative newcomer to the village and her name's Aeterna. While the village would have happily lopped off Ender's head, he has Setsuna to thank for his stay of execution, and having a stone-cold mercenary around might help Nive village as a bunch of monsters are currently laying siege to it. Our part-time jailer and full-time heckler makes a run for it, only for Setsuna to appear and free us from our magical prison. Outside, Aeterna finds us and isn't happy that we've been set free, though she will solicit our help in defeating the monsters in the village as long as Setsuna stays out of the fight. Ender and Aeterna sweep the village, slaughtering any monsters in their path until a much larger, deadlier beast shows its face. A 2-on-1 brawl might not be enough, so when Setsuna offers to help, Aeterna reluctantly agrees. Unlike the bear-like monster we fought along with Ender, this is Am Setsuna's first proper boss battle. It's a chance for us to further get to grips with each character's various abilities and how they synergize in battle. Despite gaining access to more than 3 characters, you are only allowed a maximum of 3 in battle, so it's important to find the right balance between offense, defense, and support. Aeterna's inclusion in the party will also have unlocked the first combo attack. Just like in Chrono Trigger, combo attacks can be unleashed by 2 to 3 character members who have a full ATB and enough skill points to execute the move. In homage to that classic RPG, Ender and Aeterna's first combo is X-Strike, which functions as a thin AoE attack. There are a bunch more that you'll be able to unlock as the game progresses, and they don't just have offensive capabilities. Despite Ender having pitched in to defeat the big bird, he did still try to kill Setsuna a little while back, so can't simply be allowed to wander off. Aeterna doubles down on the role of the sacrifice, stressing their role as the only thing that has kept monsters from truly overrunning the world, and Ender came oh so close to dooming humanity for a handful of coin, though it seems that the village chief is coming round to the possibility that the master mercenary isn't such a bad guy after all. Still, he can't just go free, so maybe there's a compromise, to which Setsuna suggests he joins the Sacrifice Guard, a group of people whose job it is to, well, guard the sacrifice on their journey. Ender is given some time to make his decision, as if it's going to be a decision anyway. At that time, Setsuna asks him to accompany her back to the fallen snow monument, so the the man who was ordered to assassinate her, dutifully escorts Setsuna to the monument. While the sacrifice takes some time to send up a prayer, Ender reflects on both her words and his role in the world, as well as the question that Haps proposed to him only a short while ago. Despite it all, Setsuna appears happy that Ender is now part of a guard, feeling the guiding hand of fate at work. Back at the village, Setsuna thanks Ender for his help before she departs. You are now railroaded into teaming up with the sacrifice and her party, after she bids a sorrowful goodbye to the people of Nive village. Her father, Raishin, hands Setsuna her mother's keepsake to protect her on this perilous journey. And the next stop on that journey is Flonea's Citadel. We've now secured 3 party members, so it makes sense to understand what roles these members play in battle. Am Setsuna once again aligns itself with the likes of Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, and some Final Fantasies, with party members slotting into certain well-known job archetypes. Ender is our protagonist, and in keeping with that role, sports some of the best overall stats in the game. He'll excel in both his magical and physical attack, meaning he's often on the front lines dealing out damage, your prototypical Nive. His techniques often focus on hitting multiple enemies for solid damage or singular enemies for heavy damage. Ender is also capable of offering moderate healing support and the odd status buff, but he's mainly there to hit enemies with the pointy end. Setsuna slots into the White Mage job class. She's more Yuna than Colette, but does echo a few of the clumsy sacrifices abilities. As you'd expect from a White Mage, her focus is on healing characters, curing status ailments, but she's also capable of a few magically offensive abilities, such as calling on light-based magic. In true fashion, her physical attack will be low, but her magic defense and attack end up rather high. As the game progresses, she only becomes more valuable in your party due to her healing abilities. A Turner combines a Thief and a Time Mage. She has access to the latter's staple spells, such as Haste, Slow, and Stop, and combines it with time-focused magic like Demi. Her Thief abilities announce themselves with skills that strike multiple times and a high critical hit ratio, as well as her clearly being the fastest character to act in the game. Her alignment also complements her narrative purpose quite nicely too. Each character beyond the 3 we have so far also represent one of the game's several elements: light and shadow, fire and water, and time. Ender's associated element is technically null, so it exists outside of the game's other elements, while Eterna is time and Setsuna is light. These not only come into play in terms of enemy weaknesses and resistances, as well as our character's own resistances, but play into another important game system, which we'll encounter shortly. Back on the road, a newly formed party must charter a ship in order to take them towards the Flonea Citadel, located within the Flonean territories. This being a JRPG and not reality, of course, a monster's going to attack the ship as we're mid-journey. Rushing out onto deck, we find a hooded figure about to become some sea urchin's dinner. After saving him and fending off a few trash mobs, the Loch Ness Monster appears. Fighting a monster while you're on a ship has made an appearance in multiple games, and I'm talking about a ship on the sea and not an airship. The fact I have to make that distinction tells us enough about the trope. Off the top of my head, there's the battle against the Part of Sin and the Sin Spawn from Final Fantasy X, Scourge of the Sea from Octopath Traveler 2, Moving Isle from Suikoden 4, though technically that game's centered around water, but there are several, and that's not even including when you fight enemies while on the deck of a ship. That's specifically enemies that appear at the side of a ship, but I digress. Schwarzstorm, our boss, is probably the toughest challenge a player will have faced so far. Its ability to target all characters with its tsunami attack, reminiscent of Aps's attack in FF7 but effective, is the game teaching you about the importance of having a person or people that can heal. One of the difficulties in JRPGs, RPGs in general, is the DPS healer tank triumvirate. Being able to heal damage becomes such a necessity the deeper into these games you get, that you're often railroaded into certain party dynamics rather than being able to experiment. While Setsuna can only heal one character right now, she'll eventually be able to make that heal an AoE, thus becoming more indispensable. While Ender will be able to pick up some of the healing slack later, no other character comes close, which can end up narrowing viable party dynamics. I'm struggling to think of a game that utilizes a traditional job system that's been able to effectively remedy that. Despite pounding away at Schwarzstorm, you ultimately only piss it off, so much so that it destroys your ship and sends everyone tumbling into the frigid seas. Ender awakes on a beach. We could do another trope rundown of that, but we won't. He then scours the surrounding area to stop the monsters from pouncing on our party as an easy lunch. Outside of the shore, the 3 soon arrive at the destroyed village of Serendale. While there are rundown houses and monsters aplenty, there doesn't seem to be any sign of human life, aside from one warrior hefting a huge sword and getting schooled by a pengi. After saving the warrior's life, we make with the introductions. The warrior's heard of Nive village but isn't willing to divulge any more about that. He will, however, furnish us with his name, Nadir, which sounds a little too much like Endir. Despite never having seen us before, Nadir does have some indescribable sense of familiarity he can't seem to shake. When the party mentions they're looking for the capital, he says we'll have to cross the mountains to do so, but we can stop off at Parika village before that for some R&R. Nido won't be joining us though, as he's still got some monster exterminating to get on with. As a slight aside, and for some context, Endir's name in the Japanese version is Endo, while Nadir's is actually Yomi. There's a name in Arabic, Nadir, which translates to vow, which would fit thematically with the character. In Japanese, you can read Yomi as Yomi, which is like the afterlife or purgatory, and that would also kind of fit with Nadir's character, but I can't be sure. At Parika village, we discover that there was at least one more survivor from the shipwreck, that hooded figure in black. He's part of the Magic Consortium, and he tells us that if we want passage through the mountains, we'll need to have a word with the captain. But before chatting to the captain, this is the first real opportunity to examine Spritnight. They function similarly to Materia from Final Fantasy VII or Quart from Falcom's Trail series. Spritnight have various functions such as enabling different character techniques and support abilities. One Spritnight may give Endir a new battle technique, while another may have him recover HP every time he strikes an enemy. As characters level up, they'll gain more Spritnight slots, which can either be a C for command, S for support, or A for all. There are also accessories which often allow you more slots in which to place Spritnight, but you can't just go and pick and choose any Spritnight you want. You have to create them. To do this, you have to sell the materials that you've been gathering from the myriad monsters you've been fighting, so each Spritnight has a recipe in order to craft it. The Spritnight a player can acquire is softly gated depending on where you are in the game, because enemies have a loot table which defines what material drops based on how you defeat them. Some Spritnight can be harder to acquire. For example, getting an exact kill on an enemy requires you to defeat them within a certain HP range, so an enemy's exact kill range may be 120 HP on a 100 HP enemy. Then you have the more standard rare and normal drops that change as you progress through the game. Ideally, you want to be cleaning out enemy loot tables as you progress through the game and stocking up on those materials so that you have access to more Spritnight recipes. When Am Setsuna's just getting started, the list of Spritnight may look fairly manageable, but you'll quickly find the number of techniques available to you skyrocket. For the uninitiated player, and even myself, the very first time I played the game, it can be quite overwhelming, though we'll get to digging into all that later. For now, you can simply pick a few Spritnight that look useful and be on your merry way. In one of the Parika village houses, you'll meet the captain, a woman with two giant swords strapped to her back. The party pleads their case to Freya. Despite it having been less than 10 years since the last sacrifice, the number of monsters in the world has been increasing at an unprecedented rate. Though Freya acknowledges the problem, she claims the frost caves are far too dangerous and refuses to grant the party passage unless we add another member to the team. Freya suggests one of her guard. Setsuna brings up the old man in the village, who just so happened to be part of the previous sacrifices guard some 20 years ago. Whatever the outcome of that journey, Nadir hasn't returned home and simply stayed around Parika slaying monsters. Still, Freya wants to test our mettle, so the party fights a few easy guards in order to establish dominance. With the soldiers not to scratch, Freya herself chooses to join our party instead, but before she can join, she goes off on one final patrol of the area. While she's off on her farewell tour, you may have been picking up various shiny spots on your way through areas and the overworld. These strangely named vegetables and ingredients do actually have a use. In every village, there's usually someone who will take several of the ingredients, using them to create a recipe. You then hand that over to the barman at the pub, and you'll be able to purchase that food item. In the instance of Parika village, you gain the Parika cobbler. Along with an increase to XP yield, food also offers other boons, such as increased HP, MP, buffs, material drop rates, things like that. But they're not as useful outside of boss battles or specific farming situations. After catching some Z's, the party checks on Freya, but she's nowhere to be found. A scream comes from the village entrance. Freya's been injured by a man wielding a scythe and is in no fit state to join us now. One soldier berates Nadir for not fighting the man and then rushes off to confront him. Setsuna attempts to corral Nadir into joining the party, but after his failed sacrifice 20 years ago, he's not feeling it. Instead, he's more interested in heading back to Serendale to help out the soldier. Guess that means we're helping out too. Returning to Serendale, Nadir's busy hacking through a bunch of enemies, but it seems that there's more going on than the party first thought. A short way beyond the village and into its mountains, the party finds the soldier training while talking smack to Nadir. Despite the old man trying to brush it off, they reveal the truth. The old man's been busy spending all his time in the abandoned village slaying monsters in a vain attempt to create a sense of security for Parika village. They see the lack of monsters knocking at the door as a sign of the sacrifice's success, when in reality it was a failure. Ever since then, Nadir's been shouldering that burden. Just after this revelation, an orb of light forms and spits out that man with the scythe. It's a fairly simple battle, but during more protracted fights or even normal encounters, there's a chance a singularity will occur. Singularities effectively function as temporary party buffs. These can include things such as gaining more SP, that secondary momentum bar, boost to critical hit ratios, complete enemy drops. There's even one called Chrono Burst that is actually a little frustrating because while speeding up your ATB, it'll prohibit you from using combos. Upon delivering the supposed final blow to Reaper, as he's now known, he'll do that thing where you defeat a boss and then they somehow instantly overpower you in a cutscene. Reaper's hellbent on destroying the sacrifice, which isn't made any easier with Setsuna shielding Endir after laying Eterna and Endir low for a moment. But at the last second, Nadir will jump in and rescue the party, forcing Reaper to flee. And once everyone's returned to Parika village, Freya still seems intent on joining the party, despite her battered body. They head to the Frost Caves, finding the captain and surprise guest in the form of Nadir. Freya's let slip about what the old man's been doing in Serendale. Nadir won't find any answers stewing in his own failure. Though he may not be able to forgive himself just yet, he has to move on. And we've just earned ourselves our fourth party member. Budget Auron is Am Setsuna's version of a classic tank character, with high HP and defense, outfitted with moves such as counter, provoke, and other staples of the role. He's quite a solid character that, when paired with Setsuna and Endir, creates classic gameplay dynamics. In fact, one of Endir and Nadir's combos, Blowbeat, can effectively carry a party through the entire game. If you've played turn-based RPGs, it's important to get access to moves that not only perform decent damage, but hit every target as soon as possible. It just expedites battles with trash mobs. Whether this is getting access to all in Final Fantasy VII, a wide-ranging craft from the Trails games, Firewhirl from Chrono Trigger, there's a very tangible tipping point pre and post these techniques. Blowbeat is essentially Am Setsuna's first tipping point, with even more powerful and useful combos to come later on. Navigating the Frost Caves may conjure memories of Gaia's Peak in FF7 or Fendel Glacier Ruins from Tales of Graces, and at the end, there is of course a boss. Like the Whelk enemy from FF6, this turtle-like monster has the ability to hide in its shell, becoming resistant to physical damage. Unlike the Whelk, you actually want to hit it with magic when it does this. The nature of its attacks may also help you get a feel for how Nadir's most effectively used in battle, besides being a blowbeat machine. After the monster's defeated, you can step outside the cave to reach the party's ultimate destination, the Flanea Citadel. Stepping foot into the Citadel, soldiers are speaking with a mother and daughter who have recently lost their village in a monster attack. The guard suggests heading to Tenderville, a nearby settlement where the generous Lord Avalo will offer them succor. Sounds perfectly legit. After the party states their case, they're allowed into the Citadel for a meeting with this Lord Avalo. As an aside, the name Tenderville sounds like something a KFC marketing exec would come up with for a fried chicken themed amusement park. There'd be some kind of roller coaster shaped like a frying basket and you plunge into the water, except it's like you're being deep fried or something. I know how it works, that's for the Imagineers to figure out. Anyway, if you spend your time speaking with the folk in the Citadel, you'll soon learn that unlike numerous other settlements, this place has seemingly been spared the wrath of the monsters ever since Lord Avalo came into power. Likewise, he established Tenderville as a finger-licking good place to turn for those that had lost everything. Guess we'd better meet this benevolent ruler then. Venturing into the castle grants you an audience with Avalo. Being the swell guy that he is, he's willing to lend us the use of his airship to transport us to the Last Lands. But there's one teensy popcorn chicken-sized problem. Akash, the shipwright, is nowhere to be found. He's needed to operate the vessel, but the man's hidden himself away. Now we could sit on our laurels and wait for him to turn up, or we could put our detective's hat on and find him ourselves. From asking around, one guard in particular surmises that, while having scoured the Citadel, the only logical place Akash could be hiding is in the warm, 12 special herb and spiced embrace of Tenderville. The village itself is located north of the Citadel and through the Myslay Woods. Here, though the bunnies may look cute, they're as ferocious as the one from the Holy Grail, so are best taken care of swiftly before they rip out your throat. Along the way, you'll encounter a strange-looking humanoid surrounded by several pengies. The party jumps in to lend a hand, and when the snow has settled, the boy thanks us for his help, revealing he's on a journey to the Last Lands too. Adamant that he's not a child, He introduces himself as Keir. It's not like we can just take a child on a perilous journey, but we can at least get him somewhere safe, so he's tagging along, though he's not a playable character. Outside of the My Slave Woods, Tenderville is just a short jaunt away. Inside the village, the party asks after a cache, but the name's not familiar around these parts. However, there's an old man in the village who's been here longer than most, so it's as good a place as any to start. This resident, Dinas, knows of a cache, claiming the shipwright was an honourable man and close to the former lord of the Citadel. He says a cache can be found in the Citadel's pub, but is doubtful he'll lend a hand. Dinas also asks Setsuna of her resolve. Some say the pilgrimage is pointless, but who knows what the future holds. Impressed by their answers, he hands over a letter with a magic spell inside to hand it to a cache. Returning to the Citadel through the My Slave Woods, a ghostly figure clad in armour bars the party's way on a bridge running across a stream. While Nadir's set to slay the monster, Keir steps in between the two, protesting the spirit's innocence. Keir believes the apparition isn't malevolent, he's seen it before, and it promptly vanishes. Once back at the Citadel, you can visit the pub to find a cache. While you manage to wrangle a confession out of him, he's unwilling to pilot the airship. Why? He's not fond of Lord Avalo, claiming he deposed his own father out of a lust for power. Akash protests further until the party hands over the letter. After reading it, Akash says that old man Dinas was actually the former lord. That is enough for him to pilot the vessel, so to the last lands we go. Better check in with Lord Avalo first though, it's his ship after all. The current lord isn't too pleased we got his meddling father involved. It seemed a schism arose between the two in how best to protect the Citadel's people. So much so that Avalok effectively banished his father to the land of chicken tendies. In a move no one saw coming, Lord Avalo betrays the party, paralysing Ender and crew with magic. He hauls away Setsuna and Keir to execute some kind of nefarious plan. Fortunately, Eterna's able to dispel Avalo's magic. Ender, Nadir and her take out a few guards before making a beeline to the dock. Having cut a path through the Citadel, laying waste to soldiers in the process, Old Man Dinas shows himself just as we're heading into the dock. The former lord accompanies the others as they bust through the collection of monsters waiting within the airship. In the heart of the ship awaits the Wolf Baron, who's guarding the door to Keir. This boss is the quickest the player will have fought up to this point, and its rapid flurry of attacks can catch you off guard if you're not careful. It's also the first boss encounter which has a power-up stage. After passing a certain HP threshold, its attacks become deadlier. Baron von Wolfenberg can also inflict momentum lock, which prevents a character from building momentum, but with moves like slow, protect, aura and blow beat, it's easily dealt with. In the cabin, Eterna is able to free Keir from his magical chains. He reveals that Lord Avalo intended to use him as a bargaining chip in an ongoing deal. The Lord's been sending off a number of innocents to the monsters so they won't attack the Citadel, sacrificing the few for the benefit of the many. A little ethical quandary for you there. There's still no sign of Setsuna though, that is until we head up to the deck to find the sacrifice, Lord Avalo, his father, and a cache. Turns out the current lord detested putting the fate of his people in the hands of a sacrifice with no real way of knowing if it was even effective. Avalo believes it's his duty as leader to protect his people and would take whatever measure was necessary to achieve that. Remember that mother and daughter we saw at the gate to the Citadel a while back? They've become a family bucket. With Avalo dropping Vulcan-inspired utilitarian philosophical bombs, he still wants a cache to power the airship. Of course, he refuses, so Avalo takes matters into his own hands, infusing the ship's Sprit Knight with magical energy. This does not go well. The Sprit Knight's overflowing with power, poised to explode and wipe out the Citadel. If that's not enough, Reaper appears out of the void, gunning for the sacrifice. He does us a solid and wipes out Avalo with one swing of his scythe, but we've then got another boss battle on our hands. The fight with Reaper and the volatile Sprit Knight had me scouring my memory for another boss battle example where the attacking element is more of a distraction than your actual target. I'm positive it's been done, I just couldn't remember a specific instance. Anyway, it's quite a novel twist on the usual boss encounter. Reaper isn't too much of a threat, especially with a combo of blow beat, paralysis and slow. The party is able to destroy the Sprit Knight before it raises the Citadel, but not everyone gets out unscathed. It would appear that Dinas shielded his son from something. It can't have been Reaper's attack, so I'm guessing the explosion, but Akash seems fine, I don't know. With his dying breaths, Dinas implores Avalo to remember that a lord serves to protect his subjects and makes efforts to repent for his actions. Just then, that mother and daughter appear. Dinas had managed to save them from becoming monster chow, but it's not all good news. When the Sprit Knight exploded, Setsuna defended Keir, but it meant taking the full force of the Sprit Knight, which has now left her severely unwell. Keir suggests taking her to his village so that he might help her recover. So we have our next destination, but unfortunately no airship to take us there. Back to huffing it on foot then. Partway through the My Slave Woods, Keir reveals a path to his village. Along the way, that blue ghost appears once again, but it's harmless, so they let it go. Unfortunately, there's still a ways to go, and the party must traverse the Morbreeze Mountain, a treacherous range battered by a blizzard. Along with the invisible passages you can progress through, you'll also find the new roly-poly enemies who have the ability to dodge your attacks when they're scuttling along their giant snowballs. In addition to this, the game introduces the first of several Spritnite-eaten monsters. These are beings that have been exposed to excessive amounts of Spritnite energy, thus transforming. The majority of these enemies are extremely tough and best left for near the end of the game, but they do provide a boatload of XP and rare materials to boot. This little guy in particular is your first chance to grind some levels, if you can hit the thing. While its HP is extremely low, around 40, its evasion is through the roof. It's certainly possible, and this particular monster won't even attack you. Grinding in general isn't strictly necessary in Am Setsuna, the game's pretty easy, but the sheer gulf in XP compared to what you've been fighting is quite staggering. This little dude bestows 1000 EXP compared to the pathetic yield of 69 EXP from other mobs in the area. Outside of the Morbreeze Mountains, you can reach Keir's hometown, the forested village of Hidbury. In terms of aesthetics, Hidbury is the most diverse town you will have come across in all the game. Whereas other locales conform to the more traditional Western-inspired fantasy housing, Hidbury draws inspiration from Native American teepees. Entering the village, it would appear empty, but a little ways in, 3 youths show themselves. They said that everyone in Hidbury was busy hiding from a recent monster attack. Soon, Haido, the village chief, introduces himself. He tells the party that Setsuna has an abundance of bad magical energy that must be neutralized in order for her to recover. However, Haido himself can't help us out, so Keir takes up the mantle himself. Dotted around Hidbury are glowing Spritnite veins. These veins run underground throughout the planet, not dissimilar to Final Fantasy VII's livestream. Our job is to find one that is emitting a strong enough light to be of use. As far as coziness factors in Am Setsuna go, Hidbury probably takes the top place, with its softly glowing orange lights and warm furs layering the inside of the teepees. In winter, those traditional stone houses would have been freezing unless you were chucking logs on the fire like feeding a hungry train. With a suitable spot located, Setsuna is laid over the vein while Keir attempts to cleanse her. Despite his best efforts, he's unable to move the needle. Keir's lacking his true power. He's got no choice but to soldier on. The party leaves him to it and decides to ask Haido about their options. The village chief reveals that technically, those of this village are more monster than they are human. Dubbed rarebloods, they all possess a strong affinity for magic but a short lifespan. As such, their tribe has endured generations of persecution from humans who have experimented on them in an attempt to harness their magical abilities. When the humans discovered the cost of acquiring such a large magical force, their experiments dwindled and the rarebloods sequestered themselves away in the forests. In an attempt to reverse the life-stealing effects of this abundancy of magic, they use a Spritnite stone to siphon the majority of magic from a rareblood when they're born. Haido reveals that Tor, Keir's older brother, had embarked from the village in order to find a better solution for his people, and now, after not having returned for some time, Keir intends to do the same. With this knowledge in hand, the party attempts to stop Keir from reclaiming his magic, but he's adamant about his course. But all that effort has left him tuckered out, and he promptly collapses in the snow, just as a bunch of monsters attack the village. While the villagers hide, the party rescues a small rareblood before taking cover themselves. The interlopers seem to stomp around a bit before going on their merry way. When the party next checks on Setsuna, she's doing a little better, and Haido offers to gather some medicinal herbs to help her out. Keir, however, is still determined to be of use. It's his life, so he can use it as he sees fit, and he wants to travel to the Spritnite Pillar to reclaim his lost magic. A short way from the village is a large amber chunk of Spritnite. It's a crystallized mass into which the rareblood's magic is siphoned. By approaching this pillar, Keir can reclaim his abilities. All that energy has attracted monsters though, and the party fights to hold them off while Keir channels his magic. No sooner have they returned to Hidbury than the monster, making all that racket before, shows itself. Technically, you don't have to use Keir for this battle, but why wouldn't you? Keir is the Black Mage in Am Setsuna. As such, he comes with all the trappings of that class, making him a glass cannon, weak attack and physical defense, but high magical damage output and resistance. Unlike Black Mages in previous incarnations that are able to wield multiple elements, Keir technically just has fire because each party member owns an element. However, he does sport a number of spells that are often associated with the Black Mage, such as Bio, Drain, Doom, Meltdown, and even Flare. Keir's not a bad party member by any means. His combo moves lean heavily towards status and elemental damage, which is good if you can exploit an enemy's weakness. He even gets access to some extremely powerful triple techs later on in the game, like Big Bang and Armageddon. The issue is, he needs a bit of a ramp up before he can become a truly useful character in battle. If this was a 4-party member makeup, he definitely have earned a place, but because your spongy character often ends up being Setsuna, having to worry about another character who's somewhat frail can often be more of a distraction. Saying that, if you're prepared to cover your bases explicitly to include Keir, he can be quite effective. With the help of Keir, the giant automaton thing is defeated, Hidbury is seemingly safer now, and Keir wants to continue his journey with Setsuna and a guard as a means of finding his purpose. As if hearing the decision, the blue ghost from before appears. Brother Tor is how Keir refers to the apparition. His older brother's spirit had returned to this plane to tell Keir of his death and give Keir a chance to strengthen his resolve. As a final farewell, Keir absorbs his brother's magical energy and then literally launches a fireball at him as a means to exorcise him from this world, which is pretty metal. Now a new party member's on board, our next destination is the Twalusk Mountains. Its layout is nothing different from the previous mountain range the party have travelled through recently. However, at its midpoint, Ende receives some kind of telepathic message from someone or something that would like to speak to him in private. The mercenary suggests the party take a rest. Turner finds this unusual, but Nadir, in his infinite wisdom, has concluded that Ende, having been sipping water he's not used to, is on the precipice of shitting himself. Any excuse is a good excuse, I suppose. After wandering off a short distance, Ende runs into the mysterious man who propositioned us at the beginning of the game. He's surprised to find out we've not only avoided our contract, but have joined the Sacrifice's guard. Regardless of our answer, the man finds our response odd, going so far as to threaten Ende's life. But if the Sacrifice is going to die anyway, what difference does it make if Ende or the Last Lands swings the blade? The mysterious man doesn't appear to have an answer to that, but is simply acting on an order from their master. In the end, the man is willing to essentially void their contract. From now on, they're nothing more than strangers to each other. At the other end of the mountain, their party pass through an ice floe, but are unable to directly continue across, so must make a brief diversion to the south. Here, they find the village of Royburg. Royburg's looking a little empty. While it seemingly hasn't been destroyed by monsters, its populace may be hiding from them. The gang decides to sniff around, which only confirms their suspicions, before they happen upon a small child surrounded by monsters. Saving the child reveals that the rest of the villagers have been abducted and taken to the Black Whelm cave close by. In this icy cave, along with the usual collection of monsters, the group will happen upon villagers wrapped up in silk. By defeating the beasties, you're able to systematically free a number of victims from their sticky prison. It would seem that the victims were first immobilized by magic, only to have a small creature then encase them in silk. When we next rescue an aspiring researcher, he tells us that whatever did this purposely waited until the knighthood left the village before making its move, so it's possessed of a modicum of intelligence then. He also clarifies that the knighthood are a bunch of, well, knights, led by the princess. Finally, when Endir and co say that the child directed them here, the researcher seems puzzled. All the children were captured, weren't they? Our next sticky customer claims that whatever did this did not injure its captors. It was almost as if they were being kept as food reserves. Anytime I think of something spider-related, especially when they're encased in silk, I can't help thinking of when Sam finds Frodo in Return of the King. In that scene, Elijah Wood looks like he's coming down hard off a 48-hour MDMA binge or is just lost in a K-hole. Anyway, the party forges onward. Soon they run into that kid from the village. What are the odds? Well, everyone apart from Ender is ready to delve deeper into the cave when the boy suggests there are yet more people to save. It doesn't take long to deduce that not only is this child some kind of shape-shifting monster, but is also directly responsible for capturing the villagers. Before we know it, we're launched into another boss battle. You don't have to worry, we're not really killing a child, it's just a bug child. Even then, we give it a corrective spanking more than anything. With the final blow delivered, the little bug calls out for its mama and then begins weeping. The monster plods off, apologetic towards its mother as it enters a nearby entranceway. Inside, the child stands before a giant decaying bug, presumably its mother. In kidnapping the villagers, it hoped to provide its mother with food and wake her up. But who killed the mother? Reaper, the guy with the scythe. He aimed to attack the child, but the mother bug protected it. Setsuna uses the opportunity to tell the child about her own mother. Unlike the bug child, Setsuna never met her mother. If the bug child has memories of its mother, then that's something no one can ever take away. With them, she'll live on. Better to have loved and lost and all that. The party plan to escort the little fella out of the cave, but are stopped at the exit by a female knight. She introduces herself as Julienne. We can put on our thinking caps and deduce that this is the princess the captive spoke of. Julienne wants to do a bit of bug squashing, but the party refuses to hand it over. Things are about to kick off when the boy transforms and Julienne draws her weapon. but Setsuna manages to insert herself between the two. Julienne suddenly calls on some serious magical energy, but Setsuna is still determined to solve the altercation with words. Somehow, she succeeds, for now anyway. In light of the party rescuing the villagers, Julienne is willing to help them cross the ice. However, there's something a little off about Julienne. Back in Royburg, when a subordinate attempts to talk with her, she falcon punches him into a nearby house. So, when the knight says he should enjoy the village's hospitality for a night, who are we to refuse? In canvassing the village and speaking to the serfs, you can glean that the people, and more importantly Julienne, are allegedly descendants of a powerful royal kingdom that once ruled the land. That moniker of princess may actually have some truth to it. If you chat with the aspiring researcher, he'll even inform you that the site of the kingdom is what has now become the Last Lands. Interesting. Revelations keep on coming because Ende happens to run into another familiar face in Royburg, that of Julienne's second-in-command, Cornelius. The man who wanted us to assassinate Setsuna is under the command of Julienne. So does that mean Her Highness wanted Setsuna dead? So far, Julienne hasn't been acting murderous, except to one of her own knights and the Bugchild, and I suppose a bunch of monsters that she's just itching to go and exterminate. The Bugchild's head is ready for the chopping block. Both Keir and Setsuna still want to save him, though it means delaying the mission. The party returns to the Blackwell Cave, finding the Bug Boy. They manage to convince him to not try and attack Julienne, and then the princess herself makes an appearance. Everything seemed to have worked out until they return to Royburg to find that Julienne's got a pyre going. A few of her knights who fled in the face of monsters will make some excellent kindling. Maybe she's not the benevolent leader her people once believed her to be. When Setsuna and the others attempt to placate her, it comes out that she is indeed the sacrifice. Upon hearing this, that strange malevolent aura that consumed Julienne once before returns. She tags Keir and is then dragged inside by her cohorts before causing any further damage. Something's clearly wrong with Julienne. Lilas, the soldier she'd whacked before, divulges that one day Her Highness and her party were caught in an avalanche. Julienne went back to rescue a straggler, ended up missing for days, but somehow returned home just fine. Ever since then, she's changed. In Lilas's attempts to heal Julienne, he's spoken with the Magic Consortium, who claim to have a cure. Ender speaks to our local hookup, who sheds some light on Julienne's condition. In this world, a person can only possess one type of magical energy, similar to a blood type. The princess, however, has two types of magic flowing through her. The guy will help us out, but only if we harvest a unique sprint knight from a foe at the nearby ice flows. A simple enough task, you just defeat a unique monster, and can then return to the peddler. In exchange, you get the secret medicine. Cornelius treats Julienne and it would appear she's recovered, though is unable to recall her recent displays of martial prowess, let's say. Her Highness will convalesce at Royburg, while we'll take Lilas as our guide through the Floburg waters, or so we think. Julienne catches up with us, claiming she wants to team up. She intends to see if the rumours about her kingdom being the Last Lands have any truth to them. And now we have our final party member. Julienne functions like a hybrid between a dragoon, such as Kain from Final Fantasy V or Freya from Final Fantasy IX, with a smidgen of monk sprinkled in there. No dragoon is complete without the jump command, which allows them to temporarily leave the battlefield, only to return and score some serious damage. Aside from that, she also combines some more offensive focused techniques, which make her a little similar in purpose to Ender. She's solid, don't get me wrong. In fact, Julienne has one of the most useful moves for farming Sprint Knight in the game, Astral Bloom. It's a combo technique with Eterna, which hits an enemy for every element in the game. In the end, I see her as a less versatile Ender, though she does have access to a couple of attacks that buff attack and critical hit ratios. Our party now complete, we can head through the Floburg waters. The area distinctly reminds me of the Blade Drifts of Zephyr, top tier name, from Tales of Vesperia, though you could throw in some Great Glacier from FF7 in there, or the Ice Canyon from Lost Odyssey. What would a JRPG be, if not at all, through classic adventure archetypes? The boss of this area, if you can call it that, is a giant Pengy King Hoppy, which looks like one of those kids' toys where you can smack it and it'll never fall over. There's actually a specific location in the game later on that's just full of these guys, and they drop some rare materials. Beyond Floburg waters, we stand at the Archimell ruins. As the party enters this strange, somewhat futuristic environment, a disembodied voice calls out to the party. Julienne offers a word of warning before we delve deeper. Reaching these ruins essentially marks the point where we have seen every dungeon Am Setsuna has to offer. What I mean by that is the game was made in a very economical way. The game itself has, I'd say, 5 biomes or asset packs which build a dungeon. Number 1 is the ruins, which we're in now, 2 is the mountains, 3 are forests, 4 are caves, and 5 is a slightly more bespoke dungeon that combines a number of other assets. We'll call it unique though. It's exactly due to this efficient method of level design that means there is very little in the way to speak of about the game's dungeons. I could show you a random shot from our first mountain region and one right near the end of the game, and I doubt you could even tell the difference. I completely understand the reason for doing this. Unique settings, assets, and everything that comes with building a level takes a ton of time, especially in the art, VFX, tech art department. In order to make a game on a tight budget and short time frame, you have to make compromises. This, along with the enemies, is one of Am Setsuna's most obvious compromises. It reminds me a little of Tales of Legenda because what I recall most from that game was how boring its dungeons were. Do I understand the rationale? Absolutely. Does it make the majority of the areas you pass through between destinations rather uninteresting and unmemorable? Absolutely. But I believe this was a conscious decision. It's as if the lead sat in a meeting and said, what about this game matters the most? And I think they answered that question with atmosphere and battle mechanics. Am Setsuna was never going to be a game that would feature extremely memorable dungeons. Instead, it focused on memorable and atmospheric moments. Ende walking through the forest at night, Setsuna by the monument, the stories and emotional beats the characters walk through. Would the game have been elevated if dungeons were more bespoke? You betcha. Off the top of my head, here's a bunch of dungeons and locations that have stuck with me. Macalania Woods from Final Fantasy X because it's like someone vomited a kaleidoscope. Meltokio Sewers from Tales of Symphonia because it's annoying but you can also fight giant rats. Ultimesi's Castle from Final Fantasy VIII. Any Persona 5 dungeon. The Batshit dungeon from Final Fantasy 15. Any Golden Sun dungeon, though that one with the tree is ridiculous and super long. Any instance in Lost Odyssey where Kaim kicks a bunch of rocks. FF12, man, there are a lot of Final Fantasy games I'm remembering, but you remember what it was like the first time through these locations. They stick with you for better or worse. Unfortunately, Am Setsuna's dungeons don't have that, but they do attempt to make up for it in other areas. One of the ways it tries to make up for its lack of dungeon variety is with its narrative, at least in the Archimell ruins. Partway through dungeon diving, just as the party nears a platform, a voice calls out that only Nadir and Ender can hear. The two promptly collapse and are transported to a snowy dreamscape. A regretful Nadir-like silhouette appears. The two chase it through the snow, revealing a conversation between the swordsman and Nanase and Mana. Nanase appears to be the sacrifice of a time long gone, looking much as Setsuna does now. Mana is Nanase's sister. It would also seem that the swordsman is to wed Mana, and the woman has some other announcement for him as well. Further on, we find Nanase plagued by a mysterious illness, barely able to continue her pilgrimage. It soon worsens, and Nanase isn't long for this world. She's dying of a broken heart. The swordsman's heart belongs to her sister Mana. Plagued by guilt and pain, the man now spends his time slaughtering monsters in an effort to forget. But that hurt will never fade unless Nadir can forgive himself and move on. Out of the void, Mana appears once again, accompanied by a small girl. This is Nadir's daughter, Setsuna. After this revelation drops, Ender and Nadir return to reality. Nadir asks Ender to be a bro and keep this secret to himself, which he does. Now's not the right time to drop that bomb, so when will be? You spend a little more time heading through the dungeon until finding Reaper once again, who's only grown in power. He's intent on destroying the party, but Eterna steps up to neutralize his magic before hopping into another battle. Post-battle, Eterna's all took it out, but it is strange just how she was able to summon such immense power. Outside, you'll find large violet veils barring your passage to the east, so a force towards the small town of Gatherington just to the north. Upon entering, Julienne collapses once more before righting herself, but still seems able to continue the journey through the Phrygian Heights. The problem is, though the party has heard there was a passage, no one in town can seem to remember it. With the Phrygian Heights as the only lead, Ender and co head through the cave to find a dead end. Or not quite a dead end, but a passage that has been purposely sealed with magic. When reflecting on their time in the town, the old woman who was rather adamant they gave up their search seems like the best lead, but on their way to visit her, Julienne collapses. The old woman appears and they shift her highness into the woman's house to recuperate. Strangely, the woman, who says her name is Sayagi, has healing magic similar to Setsuna, and she seems awfully surprised the party managed to detect that secret entrance. On the wall of her house are also a pair of chakrams, similar not just to Setsuna but sacrifices in general. It turns out, of course, Sayagi was once on this very same pilgrimage. After departing Nive by boat, she became shipwrecked and ended up in Gatherington. When her party attempted to pass through the Phrygian caves, they were all but wiped out by a fearsome monster. However, the pilgrimage was not a failure. Sayagi's sister took her place, with the old woman luring away the monster so that her sister could continue. Ultimately, the journey to the last land succeeded. The cave, though, is sealed, but Sayagi will unseal it if we defeat the beast within its depths. The Aurorian tiger, as it's known, is pretty relentless in its attacks. If there ever was a battle Nadir was made to get hit in the face for, this is the one. His bulky nature coupled with Setsuna's healing abilities, while Endir just wails on the thing, is your best route to victory. Still, if you're familiar with how JRPGs play, it won't cause you too much trouble. One of the most important aspects in Am Setsuna, which is easy to overlook, is your Sprite Knight setup, more so your support techs than offensive abilities. Even taking this down doesn't seem to be enough, however. It goes Purple Super Saiyan, which leads to Julienne matching its strength and totally skewering it. Julienne mutters something about a power trap within the Last Lands, not disturbing at all, but the beast's death does erase the veils that have been blocking our passage, so that's something at least. Emerging deep into the mountains, there is one final dungeon to head through before reaching the Last Lands. As the blizzard rages, the party continues along the final leg of their journey. We're met with a really nice reveal while cresting a steep incline to find a violet sky backing the frozen capital that is the Last Lands. Just one problem though, there's no path. The Last Lands float in the distance, unreachable. Out of all the party members, Eterna seems the most distraught, reassuring the party that there's another way, just as she vanishes. If that's not enough, Julienne's possessed once again and attempts to attack Setsuna. Her Highness seems to be battling an inner demon, leading her to abandon the party. With 2 party members down, things aren't looking too good. What choice do we have but to return to Gatherington and gather in our thoughts? The party reaffirms their resolve, but they're kind of low on options. At a loss, they revisit Saagi, who tells them of a man who was recently asking about the mountain in the area, in search of a new form of Sprite Knight, the restless guy who often tutted. Sound familiar? A cache has been sighted in Magna Valley, which is just beyond the Phrygian caves. Endir and the others find him close to the entrance, covered in monster shit as a means of protection. If it works right, Akash is looking for a powerful Sprite Knight stone that he could use in his airship, and some may be located in the royal ruins, wherever that may be. Turns out wherever that may be is just a few screens away, but there's no way to actually open the ruins. However, we are familiar with a place tied to the royal family, Royburg. Thanks to defeating the tiger in the caves, our route north from Magna Valley is no longer blocked, so it's a quick jaunt back to the village. When we arrive, soldiers report that they've been busy fending off coordinated monster attacks, which is never great. Inside what used to be Julienne's house, a few kids are singing a nursery rhyme to themselves. It looks like they've been orphaned since the recent monster attacks, so Setsuna wants to put a stop to that. As you might imagine, that means partaking in a few monster battles. The situation's looking a little dire. Suddenly, a bunch of monsters are vaporized by a ball of light, only for a familiar face to make a return. Eterna's back, and seemingly no worse for wear. We've got a bunch of questions for her, but the reunion will have to wait until after we've dealt with the big boy. The design of the stout sheep reminds me of the creepy sheep enemies from the Trails games anyway. This thing has a ton of health, which leads to a rather protracted battle. Pretty much every boss in the game is susceptible to slow, but Eterna is the only character that can utilize the move, so she often becomes a mainstay in the party, along with Setsuna. The stout sheep will also utilize a much maligned boss ability, healing itself. I'm trying to think of a situation in a JRPG when this is not being annoying. Sometimes you can dispel this magic in games, and I think the only time I've tolerated it is in the brothers fight from Final Fantasy VIII because number 1, you can stop it, and number 2, you feel a little smart from using Float on Minotaur and Sacred to dispel the effect. Here though, the battle just drags on. Post-battle, the question on everyone's lips is, what the hell happened, Eterna? To which she's not forthcoming with an answer. She simply says she can't tell us just yet, which ruffles some feathers. Setsuna, however, is willing to put her faith in Eterna. If Setsuna trusts her, then I guess we do too. Lilas then appears and thanks us for exterminating the monsters. The party asks about the royal crest, and he tells us that we can gain access to the ruins if we had someone of royal blood, Julienne. Unfortunately, she kinda wandered off into a blizzard a while back, and we haven't seen her since. Keir suggests visiting the children in the house once again. Inside, the children sing us a song about a bird in a valley. This is the only sung composition in the game, sung by Kotringo, and exudes a strong melancholic vibe. It's one of my favourite tracks in Am Setsuna. With a song in our hearts, the crew visit the researcher next door. They manage to deduce the song is a metaphor for an actual airship that is hidden in the Magna Valley ruins, and we need one of those. But Julienne's the key, and who knows where she is. Lucky for us, just outside, Cornelius has returned with Akash, who has just had a fateful run-in with the rogue princess. The troops barely managed to magically subdue her by the entrance to the ruins in Magna Valley, but dare not let her out until she's stable. Cornelius also reveals exactly how Julienne ended up in this state. The harrowing event that Lila spoke of a while back, where Julienne was in an avalanche, had forced the princess to consume the blood of a monster in order to survive. What would have killed your average person did the opposite to Julienne, but at a price. She now has an abundance of deadly strength at the cost of her humanity. The party needs to save Julienne somehow. Setsuna's healing powers won't cut it, but we do know of another healer, Sayagi. Back to Gatherington we go. There, Setsuna speaks with Sayagi. Though a gifted healer, her ability alone is not enough. That's not to say a certain someone else doesn't have the power, however. Setsuna. Sayagi has a special Sprit Knight that has lost its power over the years, but with a little help, they may be able to rekindle it. Help comes in the form of electrocuting Setsuna. She must withstand Sayagi's attacks for several rounds until, like a battery, the Sprit Knight is fully charged. It becomes Luminaire, arguably Setsuna's best spell. It not only deals light magic damage to all enemies, but heals the party too. On top of that, if it's activated in momentum mode, then it will bestow the party with the auto life status. Harnessing the power of Luminaire, we can return to Julienne. Cornelius will remove her bonds. Her Highness lunges for Setsuna's throat like a pit bull eyeing up a toddler, but then the power of light smites Julienne from the sky and, in doing so, manages to reclaim her sanity. During her time under the monster's control, Julienne heard a small, sad voice calling out, devouring her spirit. Thankfully, that voice has now been silenced. She is fully free to continue her journey to discover the fate of her lineage and open up the Ithys ruins. The ruins serve as somewhat of a rite of passage for Julienne to test whether she is worthy to be queen. As the team climbs higher into the ruins, they'll be gated by a disembodied voice asking Julienne a series of questions. You can answer these incorrectly, though it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. The party will just call Endir a dumbass for claiming he should promote the slaughter of innocents or a fiscally crippling tax policy or whatever. As it was said in Monty Python and the Holy Grail,
strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
Nor would I argue that a disembodied voice asking a few questions is a good enough litmus test to divine whether someone should be a monarch, let alone a good or bad one. But Am Setsuna doesn't delve too much into its political aspects. We continue simping for the monarchy, reconfiguring platforms, and generally zoning out. But by this point, we have seen pretty much every single enemy that Am Setsuna has to offer. Enemies fall into different taxonomies, winged, furred, intelligent, that kind of thing. Similar to the Tales series, you'll see different reskinned versions of enemies progressing through the game. This is obviously in an effort to save some resources and pretty common, so no complaints there. Random battles or the general scrubs that you face in the world solicit a difficult question in any game in general, but it's especially present in RPGs. If we travel back to what these battle systems were inspired by, it's D&D, and in a general D&D campaign, you're not fighting an encounter every few seconds. This allows encounters to be more tailor-made, challenging, and controllable. A D&D battle also lasts a hell of a lot longer than your average JRPG battle, unless you're fighting that Adamantoise from Final Fantasy 15 or Yasma from Final Fantasy 12. So with that in mind, what is the purpose of a random encounter in a JRPG? Are they supposed to be trash mobs that you don't have to think about, or more protracted battles that require more skill and effort? Are they supposed to test you on game mechanics, prepare for an upcoming boss? I honestly don't know. All I do know is that if I'm playing a JRPG and I start to get frustrated with the number of random encounters I'm getting, that's too much. But it's an extremely difficult number to quantify. More often than not, JRPGs shoot for quantity rather than quality. Am Setsuna is very much in the quantity camp, but verges on what I'd consider the more exasperating side, because your random enemy encounters are only as good as your battle system. While that's another topic, what I will say about enemies in this game is that rather early on, you can absolutely screen clear the majority of foes with your combo techs. That's not a bad thing per se, because you're being rewarded for understanding the game's battle mechanics. But unless you put in the work, fighting a Pengy or a Snowy Poly or those shell guys is over in one round. You rarely observe any skills or techniques a monster possesses because you'll approach them from behind, get a preemptive, use a combo, and that's a wipe. I would assume this is why each enemy has various loot tables that require you to utilize specific moves and conditions in order to reap the rewards. Getting something like a debuff kill or an exact kill obviously slows down the battle, thus you're more likely to see what the monsters bring to the table. Am Setsuna is certainly not the only game that suffers from this. The Trail series, Persona, Final Fantasy, hell, a ton do. What makes Am Setsuna that bit more egregious is that it very rarely bucks that trend outside of boss battles and Sprit Knight eating enemies. Even then, the game's just a little too easy. A part of me feels like in order to do the combat system justice, which is honestly a little too deep for the game we got, it needed fewer, more challenging encounters, which may have been a better shout than traditional random battles. Onwards and upwards, the culmination of all these trials is the Royal Airship, but we can't just hop aboard the thing and fly off. Defeating a ghostly retainer, Riddick, is the final test we must pass. It's actually a fairly decent fight. He'll spawn ads every so often and they can gang up on you if you're not careful. Like most bosses, bucking a trend for most JRPGs, he's susceptible to status ailments. I'm not one of those purists that thinks bosses shouldn't be debuffable, to make them more of a challenge. It's actually cool when a boss is weak to a few things, leaving you to experiment. The tradition of an FF boss being weak to a Phoenix down is a bit of a gimmick now, but I bet you felt smart the first time you figured it out by yourself back in the day. Riddick will also have a phase when he's down to 1/3 health, allowing him to get 2 consecutive turns in. During this phase, it's common for him to summon more enemies or unleash Demi or Holy. The old dude can actually catch you out if you're not careful, especially when moves like Demi are multi-target. All in all, he's one of the better boss fights the game has to offer. Our reward for beating an old man is the Airship, a JRPG staple. He also hands over the world key, but we'll get to that later. The party or crew hop aboard the airship and now have to bestow it with a name. Endir's subconscious offers Dianj. What does that mean? Honestly, I'm asking, what does that mean? In the Japanese, it's Dianju. If you type that in Google, you're rewarded with a couple of long boys. Did someone on the team really love borzois? Is it a portmanteau of some other word? Either way, I'm not really a fan of the name. Your airship needs a badass name. I'm thinking in no particular order. Ragnarok, The Courageous, Yggdrasil, Epoch, Blackjack, Nina. Those ship names have some bite to them. In honor of FF8, I called Am Setsuna's ship Ragnarok with a CK. But anyway, we've now earned our wings, and the world is our oyster. To acquire an airship in a game is often a momentous occasion. It's usually close to the end, where you're mentally and mechanically preparing for the final push to the climax. You have the freedom to move anywhere within reason, maybe find locations and quests that you had previously had no access to. From simply huffing it on foot from humble beginnings, you now have the skies at your command. So what's I Am Setsuna bringing as an in-flight meal to our table? Unfortunately, very little. One of the joys of gaining an airship in a JRPG was scouring the world for previously inaccessible areas. Think your underwater reactor lab from FF8, the Cat's Islands from the Tales games, running into Doomgaze in FF6, the boat from Golden Sun. You spend nearly an entire game wondering what's just beyond the horizon. But I Am Setsuna, you can take this lack of content in a number of ways, because there's not nothing, it just maybe not what you first perceive it to be. A few locales reward the player with vibes or moments rather than practical rewards. So are these places and events cut content that was cheaply and hastily papered over, calling them moments? You'll find a house in the north inhabited by an old man with a beard who's a toy maker. There's a boy by a lake to the west who pines for his fallen monster friend. There's a man alone in an ice field on death's door, lamenting his righteous theft of a jewel. Are these some of the memorable moments Tokyo RPG Factory wanted to give to the player? Or are they bitter bait and switches where content should have been? Or, like me, did they just make you feel indifferent? Through your journeying, you may have also come across seemingly empty tundras and snowfields, where a lone figure wanders aimlessly. Aside from filling your Snow Chronicles checklist, they serve no overt purpose. Like the above examples, is purely experiencing them as evidence of I Am Setsuna's world purpose enough? As bits of world building, they don't quite hit for me. A number of locations do hold some unique attractions. There's Himcot Island, where you can find a forest filled with those fat pengies that yield some rare materials. You can also spend your time filling out the ingredients from around the world's shiny spots and unlock the rest of the game's recipes. In fact, the most significant activity you can engage in currently is putting that world key you received from Riddick to good use. Adventuring around the game's various settlements and dungeons, there's a chance you stumbled upon a number of fancy looking locked chests. The world key opens these. If you played Lost Odyssey, this whole backtracking quest is similar to when Tolton joins the party. In fact, it's pretty much identical. They're both royal seals and they both bestow some useful goodies. Through the chests, you'll gain some of the most powerful weapons in the game, such as Endir's Rainbow. Sound familiar? You'll also pick up the best accessories in the game, which bestow unique buffs like increased HP and critical hit ratio, in addition to having the most slots for extra Sprite Night. It's padding pure and simple, but at least the rewards are excellent. But oh boy, this is where you really see the rinse and repeat nature of the game's environments. Another oddity, which I think is kind of sweet and something you don't see much these days, is what awaits you in the Village of Heroes. As soon as you walk through the gates, your world transforms into an 8-bit environment full of sprite-rendered monsters. These are the developers of I Am Setsuna, in computer game form, of course. You can speak to the different NPCs and they'll thank you for playing the game, have a few little personal quotes, that kind of thing. The only thing similar that springs to mind is the inclusion of developer locations in the Pokemon series, and in, I think, Final Fantasy IV. There's even an NPC you can talk to who will raise all monster levels to your levels, in case you wanted an easier time in getting those exact kills, or wanted to increase the game's difficulty. But to be honest, straight up stat matching or increasing to make a game more difficult has never quite been appealing to me. Finally, you can engage in some pre-end game grinding by battling the various Sprite Night eating enemies located within each of the dungeons you visited. These can be genuinely tough battles, with their rewards being a boatload more XP and rare items that you've currently managed to attain. These, of course, go a long way into equipping your characters with the best Sprite Knight in preparation for the game's final dungeon, the Last Lands. In the center of the map, enveloped in fog and floating ominously, is the Last Lands. The frozen capital is where all previous pilgrimages ended. Here is where Setsuna will die to buy the world fleeting peace. The royal capital is similar in design to the Flonian citadel, but literally frozen in time. Beyond the frigid bailey is the entrance to the castle. Setsuna wants to go it alone, but we've travelled as a team this far, so what's one more dungeon? Inside and outside the castle, you'll have encountered rather angelic-looking monsters. Their white furs and feathers, a contrast to the feral-looking beasties the party has encountered thus far. While your foes have had a facelift, the dungeon itself is more of the same: cold stone hallways and branching paths meant to eat up your time. In endgame fashion, you will of course be inundated with powerful items and equipment. In particular, there are some JRPG staples like the Megalixir. There's even an achievement for using it for all those out there who hoard them for a right time that never arrives. As we head deeper into the castle, Setsuna is struck by a sense of deja vu, unable to shake the feeling that all this has happened before. Undeterred, they head into the throne room to find Reaper relaxing on the royal chair. There's no cushion, so his cheeks must have thoroughly been frostbitten by now. Despite his losses, he's unrelenting. His master has given him a task and he's determined to see it through. However, even now, Setsuna still wants to reason with him. The truth is, not every battle can be won with words. Sometimes only cold steel will get the job done. This is the final encounter with Reaper. By now, your team should be rocking some serious firepower. If you've got Setsuna, Eterna, and Ender in your party, you can have access to one of the best combos in the game, Grand Cross, a multi-hit attack that will decimate opponents. Through the fight, you may get the sense that all this is a little too easy. Reaper's sporting the same tricks as previous battles. It's further cemented when defeating him yields 0 EXP. Reaper goes all ham like Julian was prone to do earlier. His master channels so much energy into him that he transforms into a giant skeletal dragon. This is where the real battle begins. It has a couple of moves that may cause trouble, in particular his penchant of swallowing a character, thus making them unusable, like Zonita did in FF6 or Kariyama in FF7. He'll spit them out after a while though, so there'll be no recruiting go-go, unfortunately. His most powerful move is Dragnarok, cool name, and he'll use this as a final attack, like Behemoth can do with Meteor. Once defeated, the dragon reverts into his Reaper form. In the following moments, we get to glimpse the man or some form of automaton behind that cold veneer. Controlled by an unseen master, Reaper is nothing more than a vessel to do his bidding. With a body that is not truly his own, are the tears he sheds his or his master's. Reaper's final regret is that he was not able to see more of this beautiful world of falling snow, and just like falling snow in a blizzard, he vanishes. Beside the throne is a portal to who knows where. Before entering, Eterna promises to tell us everything as we advance. The place beyond the portal functions as a cage to keep the power of the dark samsara at bay, a creature created 1,000 years ago by humans. This very creature destroyed the old royal capital. Even now, its magic brings forth the creatures that plague the land. Its true power is only held back by a single guardian. Eterna reveals that the role of the sacrifice is to bestow their magical energy to this place in order to maintain the dark samsara's prison. Though the cycle is repeated for 1,000 years, it's reaching breaking point, so a new solution was required. Another way to finally break the cycle, no matter how many times it took. This is the one last hope for the future. At the height of the Last Lands, the party confronts a mysterious being who looks exactly like Eterna, or rather we should say, Eterna looks exactly like this person. Our companion is a clone of the true Eterna, the Time Judge. This being has guarded the Last Lands, awaiting the sacrifices. Unable to leave, it created Eterna in order to bring Setsuna here. But why does that even matter if the past sacrifices have all been useless? Well, this time it's different. Setsuna is special. She can choose her destiny. And in this destiny, the Dark Samsara isn't sealed away, but defeated once and for all. So far, no one who has reached the Time Judge has been capable. Not only that, but the party has made this trip countless times, and each time, up until this one, when confronted with the decision of passing their energy to the Time Judge or fighting the Dark Samsara, they chose the former. And each time, the world was destroyed, forcing the Time Judge to wind back the hands of fate. By harnessing the space-time Sprite Knight, time can be reversed to before the calamity. This is the sense of deja vu, the remnants of the past that had clung to Setsuna during her journey. So what makes this time different? Sure, the monsters are fiercer, the appearance of the Vanished Lands, Reaper, but most importantly, Ender. The party may have what it takes to turn things around this time, but the Time Judge wants to see our resolve in action. There's one penultimate fight on our hands. Being a Time Judge, she sports a number of magical attacks that you may associate with non-elemental and time magic: slow, stop, meteor. If you're a little underleveled, she may even get a chance to use them. But at this point in the game, Endir's Battle Cry, which buffs all stats and can automatically proc your turn, combined with Grand Cross, is absolutely devastating. A cool boss the Time Judge may be, but even at this late in the game, you can absolutely trounce everyone if your party's set up smartly. In the end, time waits for no man, but it is defeated. With the last of their fading strength, the Time Judge has one more trick up their sleeve: Reaper. The Dark Samsara is no longer controlling him, and motivated by the debt he feels he owes Setsuna, Nides, as you can call him, will join the party. So yeah, kinda lying about Julienne being the final party member for dramatic effect, but that's what the game wants you to think. Kinda like Magus in Chrono Trigger. Before fading away, the Time Judge shares their name, Utes. Now, all that's left is to head into the giant spider womb and finish the game, or not. As I said a good while ago, the combat system in Am Setsuna seems like it was designed for a much more challenging game. On the surface, an ATB battle system is easy to get to grips with. Positioning in battle doesn't matter too much, not like it does in a Trails game. Attacking using skills, items, that's all basic RPG accoutrement right there. Even the enemies you face aren't terribly complex. They'll attack, sometimes their moves hit more than one player if you're grouped together. Momentum you learn by doing as you play the game more, and you'll learn when to gamble stacking momentum with attacking. Likewise, if you go through the game unworried by enemy drops, the generic drops for a player who switches around their party members and uses combos will net you enough Sprint Night to get through the game. It'll be a little challenging in some instances, sure, but it's totally achievable. The Sprint Night slot system is, on the surface, simple. You can either equip a technique, support skill, or it's a free slot. From those drops, your average player will have enough to fill out their slots as they level up, but it's a confluence of mechanics that can cause confusion or Sprint Night fatigue. As you progress through the game, you'll find that more and more recipes become available, and browsing down that list takes a good bit of time, especially for support Sprint Night. Kind of like the Gambit system in Final Fantasy XII or the weapon mods in Final Fantasy X, you have a ton of customization available and can really exploit Am Setsuna's mechanics. If you take the time to understand effective combinations, it's awesome, but the game was intended to be able to capture a casual audience too, so is this system there for JRPG diehards? And if it is, my question is why? It's kind of facetious, but the game's not difficult. The Sprint Night system, especially support techniques, don't have a real challenge to match its depth. What exactly are you stacking abilities that heal MP and HP on hit, keep your counters from resetting, not expending item quantity on use with momentum 4? It's not like those aforementioned Final Fantasy games or a ton of other JRPGs where beyond the main game, there's another section of the game for those who fully understand and capitalize on the systems available. Think of Final Fantasy VII. You can happily defeat God without engaging in a ton of extra content or mastering the game's materia system. If you want to fight Ruby and Emerald, seeking victory in the battle arena outside a specific strat, you need to use everything at your disposal. Yeah, I know it's a question of budget and time to have this extra content, and the game tries to do that. It's one of the cases in early development where you're designing how these systems work without asking why or when a player would get real value from them. I don't think because there are some cool combinations is a good enough answer. You want your understanding of these systems to be tested. I can imagine someone not as well versed in JRPGs seeing these Sprint Night and their explanations and just piecing out, because the game doesn't provide much in the way of tutorializing their true benefit or really hammering the importance of using different techniques to defeat enemies in order to open up your options. Another layer on top of all this is the game's fluctuation system. The accessories that you wear may have an associated flux. This can be anything like improving defense or other passive or situational buffs. I'm sure there was a point when playing this game you looked at the accessory list and your eyes glazed over, scrolling through dozens of accessories, each with some different flux and further zoned out. Again, if you're really engaging with this system and look to exploit it, you can build on your power even further. Your average person may have an accessory equipped to see the flux pop up at the end of the battle and think, cool, I guess I'll just accept it. If you wait until near the end game, you can farm powerful abilities for your most powerful Sprint Night, but it still begs the question of why. Despite this, I still think it's a cool system that can generate some excellent combinations. A player can spend a large chunk of time investing in this, and for what? By that point, you're already capable of steamrolling everything Am Setsuna can throw at you. As for Sprint Night techniques themselves, my biggest issue with them is that they don't feel different. This may be just an issue unique to me, but with Endirs or other characters attacking Sprint Night, I fail to see the bang for my MP buck. Some moves have a large MP cost to them. Compare Endir's shock to his spark. Sure, there's an additional effect, but it never feels worth spending that much MP. Genesis, his most powerful Sprint Knight attack, is 80 MP. I find it really hard to justify its use. I appreciate the variety, especially with characters like Eterna, Keir, and Setsuna, but a system akin to the Trails series where you learn techniques at level increments that are very clear about their use cases, I think that would have been a better choice and removed much of the ambiguity around damage payoff for MP investment. Chances are you'll experiment with a few Sprint Knight, but land on a handful that you actually feel have a tangible use. As an answer to all these issues, you could say, well, just turn on enemy level matching. Sure, it makes enemies hit harder and have more health, but it still doesn't answer fundamental mechanical flaws. That's not to say I don't like it. The reality is the game isn't challenging enough to justify its deep customization system, which is one of its biggest misses. But let's make this more of a compliment sandwich by taking a look at the game's weapons. Am Setsuna's equipment system, convoluted accessories aside, does sport some sick weapon designs. If there's one thing I love in a JRPG, it's opening a chest or buying a new weapon in a shop, equipping it, and it's showing up in battle. It's funny looking back at the basic iron sword from the start of RPGs and then rolling into the final battle with the Godkiller 5000 that radiates kaleidoscopic light. A great way of communicating progression. Am Setsuna absolutely nails its weapon designs, especially with Nadir and Ender. They're just so cool. I love how whichever weapon Ender wields, it'll emit this dark ebbing light. It reminds me of the Soul Reaver from the Legacy of Kain series. But yet another brick in the wall of Am Setsuna's somewhat obtuse mechanics is weapon improvement. What the game doesn't tell you is, number one, every single weapon can be improved to the same level, and number two, what's more important is the weapon's individual buff more than its raw stats. For the first point, to improve a weapon, you must use an ore, of which there are several different potencies. You can purchase ore quite early on, more unlock as you progress through the story. With the rate at which you obtain new weapons, it's not economically sensible to buy any ore or upgrade a weapon until you've decided on your ultimate weapon. Then, it's up to you which weapon buff you feel the most effective. Honestly, it's a cool way of handling late game weapons and something that may have gone over a lot of players' heads, especially if you end up wasting a ton of money on upgrade materials and not really seeing the effects. Accessories, however, unfortunately, are handled in a more scattergun approach. At first, you may not understand why there are so many available. Aside from the variables in the types of extra slots they sport, some possess a number of associated fluctuations or passive effects, like being able to see enemy HP. Like with a number of other systems in Am Setsuna, it's too much too soon without robust enough tutorialization in the game to convey to the player the reason why they may want to be particular with their character's equipment. As is customary with many JRPGs, that final moment before you pass the final threshold, side quests and other unique things tend to open up. For Am Setsuna, you can use this opportunity to clean up anything you've missed or complete character-specific side quests to earn their ultimate Sprint Knight. These quests are quite short, but are worth briefly mentioning because they flesh out characters a little further. Endir's side quest sees him travel to Nive Harbour, where a man wandering around hands him a letter. We are instructed to visit 3 separate altars throughout the world. Endir also receives the nameless Sprint Knight. The majority of this quest is busy work. As you may have seen through your travels, there were a number of altars, Serendale, the Mowbray Mountains, and the Himcock Forest. At the locations, Endir receives a cryptic message, spurring him to the next location. Once you've visited all these shrines, you'll travel to Craigholm Island and into the Snowfield House. Here, Endir meets a familiar face, Hapspur. The old man asks a series of questions about how Endir, or us, feels about the world. Are the monsters good or bad? Are humans foolish creatures? Are all our efforts in vain? Hapspur tops it all off by claiming to be a monster, and if Endir doesn't defeat him, he'll kill his companions. Now, there is more to unpack with Hapspur's words that I'm deliberately leaving out for later, because it ties in potentially with the overarching plot. For now, Endir must fight Hapspur one-on-one in what is one of the game's toughest battles. You have to be extremely cautious about the order of your attacks because Hapspur can pile on the damage. You can't go all out because the man will hit you with a bunch of attacks and wipe you out. It's actually a decent test of how you've been setting up the support Sprint Knight around your character, resulting in one of the tensest battles of the game. Of course, when you do land the finishing blow, the boss has a cheap final attack that may finish Endir off if you've not been watching his HP. For the record, I don't think Hapspur is a monster. I believe he was simply using it to motivate Endir into giving the battle his all. Hapspur will channel his remaining life force into the Sprint Knight to bestow Endir with his ultimate technique, Genesis. More impressive than the move itself, which powers up in battle with the momentum charges used, it combines with Eterna and Setsuna to create the coup de grace triple tech extremely powerful. Setsuna's side quest is a simple one. If you return to Nive village with Nidere in your party, remember he's Setsuna's father, and confront Raishin, several scenes take place. Nidere tries to hide himself from Raishin's gaze but ultimately fails. They both pretend not to know each other until the two men take the conversation outside. Endir acts as emotional support for Nidere. Raishin wants to know why he never returned to the village after Nanase died. He had a wife and a child on the way. As we learned, Nidere was so consumed by guilt over the failed pilgrimage that he wasted his years endlessly slaying monsters in a rundown town. Raishin's rightly furious with Nidere and refuses to forgive him, but the two agree not to let Setsuna in on the secret. Setsuna, however, overhears their conversation. How much of it? No one can be sure. No one but Setsuna really knows, but she figures that Nidere used to have a crush on her mother and leaves it at that. From the chat, they do come up with a clue about a possible Sprit Knight hiding place in the nearby Dashai Woods. A little ways from the entrance is a secret passage to a small grove. This was Nidere and Mana's special place. In a heightened moment when a monster appears, Setsuna calls on a newfound power. Her mother's keepsake, which Raishin had given her way back when she first left Nive, has now transformed into the Sprit Knight Holy Light. The more HP Setsuna has healed in battle, the more powerful the move, and it's pretty sick. The events in the grove bring a little closure to Raishin, Nidere, and Setsuna. While Raishin won't forgive Nidere, he can at least respect what he's doing on the journey. For Nidere, he's finally been able to return and give Mana a belated farewell, and for Setsuna, she now holds a piece of her mother's will. Eterna's side quest is little more than a fetch quest that provides a little insight into the Magic Consortium. In the village of Tenderville is a shady guy who gives us a quest to find the president of the Magic Consortium. He resides in the Nameless Village, an isolated settlement where those who wish to cut themselves off from the world reside. At the village, the crew speaks to the village chief, who claims that the president was indeed here at one time, but has since died, or rather was killed by a monster. The giant monster just so happens to be wandering around when the party ventures outside. Upon seeing the beast, Eterna feels like the old man pulled the wool over their eyes. The big beastie is the president of the Magic Consortium. Returning to the village chief, he says that the president had been researching powerful Sprit Knight in an attempt to revert an ancient being back to its original self, a form of penance for the consortium's mistakes. The chief asks us to put the monster out of its misery. Lucky for us, it's just waiting by the entrance. Even luckier, it just pieces out and dies. Back with the village chief, Eterna demands he destroy his research and perform no more human experiments on the people of this village. Care to catch us up, Eterna? Turns out the old man is the president of the Magic Consortium. Well, one of the several presidents the organization has. The purpose of this experimentation was to find a way to hold back the rising tide of monsters in the world. Still, is this really a good enough excuse? Eterna threatens the man to cease any further experiments, and he promises to do so. A little uncertain of a resolution, but whatever. You can head back to Tenderville and, you guessed it, this guy is another one of the presidents. While he claims to have never experimented on anyone, he does have a powerful Sprit Knight in his possession that may well have been birthed from all those lives. Giradia is a Sprit Knight that becomes more powerful the more unique/general actions Eterna uses. It's pretty decent, especially when combined with Eterna's turn speed and her increased critical hit ratio. Nidere's quest has him returning to Parika village where he'll speak to Freya. He wants an old weapon from her, but she's not willing to give it up until he heads down to the beach where a guest is waiting. This is Shinku, who also served on the failed pilgrimage with Nidere. Over the years, Shinku's resentment towards Nidere has grown, so much so that he wants the old swordsman dead. But Shinku's not strong enough to swing the blade, but Freya is. The two engage in a one-on-one battle that you can just hit counter and then sit back and relax for an auto win, so nowhere near as compelling or difficult as Endir's solo fight. The purpose of the battle was more a chance for Nidere to express his newfound clarity and ability to let go of the past and move on. Freya knew it too. She'd arranged the whole thing, even bringing on board Shinku, who bears no ill will to Nidere. For his triumph over the past, he's rewarded with the Master Sword and the Rebellion Sprit Knight. For Keir, it's a trip back to Hidbury. While Hydor has no Sprit Knight for us, he may have some new allies. At the Sprit Knight pillar, the party finds 3 rare blood sisters, Sig, Quatra, and Tron, who may be an homage to the Magus sisters from the Final Fantasy series. They claim that Keir's brother Tor has rescued the sisters from a bunch of humans who had been experimenting on them. What's more, they seem pretty powerful to boot. Though other members of the party aren't too sure about bringing them on board, Keir's up for it. Nothing could possibly, they've trapped the entire party. The sisters intend to kill the sacrifice and the rest of the party, but choose to spare Keir. The years of torture at the hands of humans have left them bitter. They want to harvest the power in the Sprit Knight pillar in order to exact their revenge on the rest of the world. Despite Keir's attempts to reason with them, the sisters can't be swayed. Kay has faith that humans and Red Bloods can coexist, no matter what happened in the past. The sisters, however, will ultimately test their conviction in battle. You don't have to use Kay though, he can cheer from the sidelines given how spongy he is. Similar to how the Magus sisters functioned, Sig, Clotra and Tron occupy different roles in battle. One can heal the party, one is more of a physical attacker, the other is more adept with magic. If the three of them are left alive long enough, they can combine to use Delta Attack, which is reminiscent of the Larry, Curly and Mo fight from FF6, though I believe they use a differently named attack. Defeated, the sisters' hatred was simply too strong, despite Kay's attempts to bring them to our side. As a parting gift, they bestow Kay the Doom Sprit Knight. It's similar to Crusader from Final Fantasy VI in that it deals massive damage to both allies and enemies alike, so kinda useless. Juliette's quest sees her returning to Royburg to speak with Cornelius about the robber blacksmith who stole the Royal Sprit Knight stone. He hid somewhere in the Archimell ruins. Your first port of call is actually the Lastlands, where you can examine a house belonging to the blacksmith in the courtyard known as Grinch's Forge. Then, the party must backtrack through the Archimell ruins to reach a previously inactive teleporter. Julienne calls out the blacksmith's name, thus activating the portal. The party arrives to find the blacksmith, or at least what's become of him. Corrupted by the Sprit Knight he stole, it's transformed him into a monster that has been trapped down in the depths for over 1,000 years. Being a merciful leader, Julienne opts to put the monster out of its misery. The resulting fight is less unique than some of the others, it's basically just a reskin. Defeating the monster yields Julienne's ultimate technique, Eclipse. Finally, we have Fides. I neglected to speak about him earlier because he has the unfortunate nature of joining the party extremely late in the game. Technically, just after getting him, you could head straight to the boss and be done with the game. In essence, he's a bit of a mishmash of jobs. He'd maybe fit into the Dark Knight job role, but perhaps is more of a Spellblade. He has access to some powerful dark magic, similar in execution to Eterna, in addition to physical attacking and stat-focused techniques. I'm guessing, like a lot of people, Fides didn't feature much in people's parties. He is, however, extremely quick and does have some decent combos. For his side quest, you return to Gatherington. Here, Fides can speak to an NPC to learn about a cursed Sprit Knight stone. On your way out, one of the townsfolk says they were attacked in the Phrygian caves by a small child wielding a strange Sprit Knight stone, so you travel back to where the gang originally fought the Aurorian Tiger to find the bug child who's back at it again. The child's hatred has obviously continued to grow, continuously kindled by the death of his bug mama and the human society shunning him. Fides being here, seen as though he killed the kid's mother and all, is rather awkward. While the party tries to calm the boy down, Fides is indifferent to it all. He's just there for the stone. Fides won't even apologize for his past transgressions. What's done is done. He simply wants the stone and will take it. Bug Boy powers up and begins attacking Fides, lamenting the fact he's been forced into solitude. Fides attacks the child, but leaves him uninjured, only taking the Sprit Knight. However, the cursed Sprit Knight manifests the same monster that Fides had transformed into in the throne room, so it's the dysmorphic monster round 2. Another battle, another use of coup de grace, and another victory. With the beast defeated once again, all that cursed energy is still channeling into the Sprit Knight, but it's an entity Fides is familiar with. It's his master's emotions. All the hate the Dark Samsara feels for itself and the world seeps into all who use the stone, but that hatred, though powerful, only leads to destruction. It's a burden that only Fides can bear, and if there comes a point after the pilgrimage is over that the child still wishes to kill Fides, he need only seek him out. The Sprit Knight in question, Ragnarok, is also a move the monster used and is quite powerful. The more stacked momentum Fides has, the more powerful it becomes. Am Setsuna's purposely isolated approach to its soundtrack is a tool to express the game's themes of loneliness. Ironically, it achieves this in concert with the game's story and world design, a collective solitude, as counterintuitive as that sounds. The only other game parallel I can think of is another one of Square Enix's games, Dungeon Encounters, which mainly consists of a virtuoso guitar shredding. Outside of games, Birdman, the 2014 Alejandro Inarritu film, its soundtrack was composed by Antonio Sanchez, and that was just all drums. Am Setsuna's track is almost vaudevillian, like a silent film. Many reviewers praise the game's soundtrack as one of Am Setsuna's strongest aspects, but it's easy to understand why such a purposely stripped down OST might be annoying for some. From what I've seen online, the reception seems to be mostly positive, though a few people believe the music became grating after a while. You often spend so much time in the world of a JRPG that its OST can come under more scrutiny than most games. Over the years, I feel there's been a conscious dip in quality. It's not because of the skill of the composers, but the circumstances they're designing under. Since JRPGs have veered so far towards MMO-like experiences, you're often stuck in the same areas for potentially hours on end, which forces the soundtrack to transform into a nightmare elevator music scenario in which it just exists to not become distracting or tiresome. This struck me recently with Final Fantasy XVI and Tales of Arise. None of that music stuck with me. It existed as this element I sometimes recalled was there when playing, but then you have the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth OST, Persona, Star Ocean, The Second Story, even the most recent Eiyuden Chronicles. Those stuck with me. It's the same for Am Setsuna's sometimes jaunty, sometimes melancholic piano. I'd rather risk becoming annoyed by a soundtrack that has some bite to it than being bored and forgetting it exists. Am Setsuna's soundtrack does manage to run the gamut of emotions, wringing everything it can out of the ivories. It's a testament to Tomoki Miyoshi's composition and Randy Kerber's performance. Some of my favourite tracks include It really is a superb OST. In March 2016, the soundtrack was released, and later that year, an arranged version to Winter's End was also made available. They're both equally a joy to listen to. For me, Am Setsuna's soundtrack is one of the game's strongest facets and perfectly captures Hashimoto's deeply melancholic wishes. The final bit of content worth a mention are the various ruins, 3 in all, that populate the world. They are the Aparth, Mulbeld, and Lanif ruins. In these reskin dungeons, modelled on the ruins you will have passed through before, lay the previous bosses for in the main game and in the side content. The Lanif ruins in particular houses what I assume is supposed to be Am Setsuna's super boss, the ruler of time. According to the lore, this being emerged from when the ancients, the old civilization, created an immensely powerful Sprit Knight, harnessing time and space. From it, this guy popped out. I'm not sure if it's specifically supposed to be Lavos inspired, but it's not all that difficult. It has the ability to churn out some decent physical damage, as well as nullify physical and magical damage from time to time, but a super boss of old it is not. We're not dealing with the esoteric battle conditions or setup like you would with Ruby or Emerald, or Galdera from Octopath 2, the Dark Aeons, or any super boss that really puts your knowledge of the game and its mechanics to the test. Still, there's an achievement for it, so that is something. With its defeat, however, we are ready to finish the game. You can tackle the Dark Samsara in one of 2 ways: battle it at full power or defeat the 4 remnants surrounding it in order to weaken its strength. Whichever method you choose has no bearing on anything save for the level of difficulty. If you choose to battle the monsters surrounding the Dark Samsara, they are a repeat of significant story bosses you've encountered on your journey. The concept of samsara, the cycle of life, is a Sanskrit word and a fundamental concept in Indian religions, and a number of others too. The Wheel of Life is a term often associated with samsara and was obviously chosen as a name of the final boss because of its thematic representation. This world has been stuck in a repeating cycle, but in its current state, true rebirth is impossible. Truly progressing the wheel is a rebirth in which the world can ultimately survive instead of being continuously wound back. The Dark Samsara is the spiritual gum in the gears. After all the cleanup around the world, all your levels gained, and all the powerful Sprit Knight in your possession, why wouldn't you fight the Dark Samsara at its ultimate power? Of course, everyone's scared, we're killing God after all, but Ende can offer some words of encouragement, and the team can each state their reason to fight before plunging into the melee. As a boss, the Dark Samsara at full power will be similar to the other challenging bosses you've fought in taking off boxes around the world. It's got some powerful attacks capable of one-shotting party members, but nothing you've not encountered before. No one in my party was above level 50. If you wanted, and I honestly don't know why you would, you can technically grind to level 99, But at this level, even the might of the fabled Dark Samsara should be no match for your super tricked out party. When you've struck the final blow, the Dark Samsara will cast Space-Time Collapse, which is an extremely powerful attack that can easily destroy your entire party if you've not been watching your health. If you survive it, then you can watch as the Dark Samsara is finally vanquished. The party regroups and it seems like we've won, but Setsuna can't help feeling like something was reaching out to her. Strong feelings of hate and raw emotion, human feelings. Aeterna reveals that, long ago, in a time before the Dark Samsara, humans possessed powerful magical abilities. Over time, their power began to wane. People desperately tried to recapture that power in whatever way possible, often from those few gifted beings who still possessed a strong magical energy. One day, there was a boy with vast reserves of magic who offered himself to researchers in the royal capital. These scientists extracted his powers, continually refining it until it became too great and absorbed the child, turning it into a mass of pure energy, turning it into the Dark Samsara, the being that wiped away the old kingdom but was then sealed away by the Time Judge. Even now, the Dark Samsara still lives, though not in this world, but the past. As fragments of magical light float in the air, Ende recognizes a similar concentration of energy along the ground. Though the time-space sprint knight is gone, an intense, emotionally charged magical entity is capable of effectively recording a point in time, leaving remnants in the world. And these are the remnants that we, the player, have seen throughout the game, where we recorded our journey. Setsuna can see them too. With this, they may be able to reach the past and the Dark Samsara. The party offers up their magical energy and final farewells in order for Ende and Setsuna to travel back in time. The two find themselves at Nive's port. A short ways away is Nive village, where Raishin still patrols the gate, welcoming travelers. He claims to have seen a figure by the falling snow monument earlier. There, standing in front of the monument, just as Setsuna and many other sacrifices did before her, is the Dark Samsara. Though human in form, it appears nothing more than a husk, stuck in perpetual anguish. Setsuna, however, is adamant that there is still some remnant of humanity left in the Dark Samsara. In the next instance, you can listen to the being's inner thoughts as it literally spews its pain at Ende. The Dark Samsara's regret, frustration, despair, and anger barrage Ende until the creature has nothing left. Then, Ende can strike the final few blows to put it out of its misery. As the Dark Samsara lays against the monument, Setsuna attempts to comfort the creature, going so far as to absorb its malice into her. With someone to share in the Dark Samsara's pain, maybe that will somehow make amends for all the time spent alone. This was Setsuna's plan all along. And now she pleads with Ende to take her life. We've come full circle. Ende raises his sword, and you're given a choice. Across the world, it seems that people can sense the sacrifice's pilgrimage was a success. Aeterna, her job fulfilled, vanishes for good this time. The rest of the party can return to their lives, having hopefully created a world worth living in. As for Ende, he still walks a lonely road with the memories of Setsuna for company. So, what to make of all that? I Am Setsuna's story centers around sacrifice, a theme that touches the characters and the world. Setsuna is sacrificing her life to buy the world a temporary reprieve from the monsters. Aeterna, or Utes, is in that same vein offering up their existence in order to defeat the Dark Samsara. Nadir sacrificed his chance of a family and happy life out of guilt. Kier is trading their life in order to be powerful enough to aid his people. Julienne gave her sanity over to a part of the Dark Samsara's hatred. Fides handed over his humanity to his master. Throughout the world, in the various places the party visited, we saw how the monsters had taken the lives of innocents. But beyond that, we saw how their sheer presence had stolen something more: humanity. Trading people for a small reprieve, human experimentation in order to tackle a larger systemic threat, people turning on each other out of desperation. The echoes of the past influencing the future, like Samsara, continue to repeat. The only real constant over that time was us, people. We create our own misery. But dialing it back in, what was Ende's sacrifice in all this? Did he forsake his mercenary life in order to join Setsuna? Does he abandon his mercenary ways in order to turn over a new leaf? Well, we don't know. I think the Tokyo RPG Factory missed a trick in not making Ende his own character that we experience the plot through. Without any understanding of who he is really as a character, it becomes the player's journey, but there's not enough meat on that bone to make it satisfying. Why does Ende choose not to execute Setsuna when he first meets her by the fallen snow monument? Beyond, there would be no game if he did. What's Ende's arc in all this? What motivates his change? And what kind of character does he become when the journey's through? The meager and inconsequential choices the player has direct control over during the narrative and no substitute for actual characterization. If they had a consequence beyond a slightly altered response by another character, those choices may have carried more weight. However, if we explore the ending a little more, there are a number of opinions floating around. Firstly, it's understandable that a lot of players would find the end of Am Setsuna slightly underwhelming. We are seemingly provided no closure. Is Setsuna dead? Did she survive in some form or another? Just where is Ender? Honestly, if I'd loved, not just liked the game, it would have rustled my jimmies. We had defeated the Dark Samsara on the surface, meaning there was no more need for a sacrifice. Setsuna could live, until, in keeping with her character, she chooses to burden 1,000 years of the Dark Samsara's pain so that the world may, potentially, never fear it again. When I first completed the game upon release, I was kind of like, kind of ambiguous. Though it's good to be annoyed that there was no closure, right? It means you connected on some level with I Am Setsuna. You may now share that melancholy or even frustration. One possible theory to explain the ending, at least on our terms, could be that after he deals with Setsuna, Ender is now stuck in the past. In this timeline, Setsuna may not have been born yet. Setsuna's mother, Mana, may be pregnant with her, and Mana's sister, Nanase, is currently on their doomed pilgrimage. Ender passes his time as a mercenary of the mass village. Ender is born 20 or so years later. Old Ender, now going by the name Hapsper, recommends a mercenary to Cornelius, Julian's aide. In this reality, the Dark Samsara is still a threat. Setsuna's ultimate sacrifice only affects the timeline they came from. What this culminates in is a winning scenario where Ender will always be a part of the sacrifice's guard, therefore they always succeed in defeating the Dark Samsara. One cycle ends, another begins. In all realities, Setsuna is fated to die. Ender's ultimate sacrifice is his future, chained to a cycle that results in being the one to end Setsuna's life. Bittersweet, Setsuna. From a time travel perspective, it may make no sense at all, like being your own grandfather, but it does lend the narrative a little extra weight. Am Setsuna does a fine job evoking these themes in its wider narrative, but its characters are a little too pigeonholed into archetypal roles. They certainly have nice little arcs, I just wish there was a little more to them. If we measure how they're handled by the era the game is trying to pay homage to, it'd slot right in. Viewing it through a more modern lens, trying to slot it alongside more contemporary JRPG releases, you'll find it lacking. If we're talking about specific games of that era, Final Fantasy IV and VI had more memorable and compelling characters, but even that's not perfect. Those games are elevated as an entire package. Their battle mechanics, world, dungeon design, story, characters. If Am Setsuna was stronger in other areas, without its narrative being one of its hero features, it wouldn't have received as much scrutiny. At its core, Am Setsuna is by no means a perfect game, but it is an extremely earnest attempt to capture the spirit of that bygone era of JRPGs. In its attempts to bring it up to speed with the latest technology, it created a glut of over-engineered systems that don't complement its overly simplistic boss and enemy designs. Its bittersweet story does manage to invoke a feeling of melancholy Tokyo RPG Factory search for, with a number of particularly moving moments, but its characters and a number of other facets like the dungeon designs and environments are too underbaked to give it a lasting impact. But I wanted to look at it because it's kind of an oddity. It is in a sense an indie game, but backed with Square Enix and its RPG legacy. To say Am Setsuna is anything but a labour of love created by a small yet dedicated team would be a grossly ignorant way to view the game. Does it succeed as an homage to games of yore? Yes. Does it manage to bring a JRPG experience to the modern age? Not as well as it could have. At its core, it's a game that is focused on not repeating one's past mistakes, but doesn't do quite enough to create a perfect timeline. Its plot is too rote, its world too barren, its theme notwithstanding. RPGs of yesteryear were AAA blockbusters of their time, which allowed them to be such densely packed affairs. Unfortunately, I think this may have hurt the game more than truly independent offerings that attempt to recreate that golden era magic would have. It's an albatross around your neck. When I think of modern games that attempt to ape games like Chrono Trigger or the greats, I think of Fantasian, Chained Echoes, and Sea of Stars, at least on console. From Am Setsuna, Tokyo RPG Factory went on to develop Lost Sphere, which released in 2017, and then Oninake in 2019, before eventually being absorbed back into Square Enix. Does this mean that Square Enix shouldn't pursue an indie spirit classic RPG? These days, I don't think they're willing to gamble on it anymore, but that doesn't mean it's dead. Sure, its peak has passed, but people want games like this. Above the battle systems, people want an engaging experience, a world to get engrossed in and care about. And that's what the golden era of RPGs delivered above all else. Have you played Am Setsuna or any other Tokyo RPG Factory games? What do you think about them? about the loss of traditional JRPGs, whatever that may be. And if you want to like and subscribe, go for it. Take it easy.